Red Mountain side. Savilt Roderick Trelawney, the tyrant of Red Mountain and the exiled yet rightful king of the Trelawney Kingdom. Description: Savilt Roderick Trelawney is a very old man who was one of the endgame raid bosses before the first expansion came out for the game. Unlike some others who Vaile tamed, Savilt did not seek a way to prolong his lifespan, and it is likely that the only reasons that he is still around are that he was too stubborn to die before Vaile came back and that he was still partially regulated by the rules of the game. Savilt would have been a giant of a human when he was in his prime, but now he is a feeble old man. Despite his loss of vigor and physical power, he still outclasses a good number of S-rank adventurers in terms of sheer power, and his long lifespan has let him train himself to perfection in both mind and body. While the body has withered, the mind has not, and it is due to this that the tyrant of Red Mountain has been able to pull the right strings and establish a criminal empire. He has been playing the long game, moving pieces into place for longer than any other human has been alive. His end goal seems to be the takeover of the Trelawney Kingdom and the installation of Vaile as its monarch. He views his criminal empire as a means to an end and a necessary evil to be done for the sake of his master. Nora Vandal Trelawney, the second-in-command to the tyrant and the hybrid battle mage extraordinaire. Description: Nora Vandal Trelawney is the descendant of Savilt and the current second-in-command of the Red Mountain Bandits. She has some traces of her ancestors' blood in her and therefore have potential and power that more than exceeds that of any normal member of the races. She has a body that would be to die for, with lightly tanned skin and a quite fit body. Not overly muscled, she looks like a hard cow female adventurer with a more close-quarters martial combat style of fighting. Yet she is also quite proficient in magic. She fights dirty, as one would expect from an outlaw, and uses a mixture of various underhanded tactics such as throwing poison in the eyes of her foes or making subtly seductive movements to distract her enemies. She would do anything to help win the long game that her family has been playing against the Trelawney Kingdom, and if that means using cruelty and malice, then so be it. Despite her outwardly crass and rude appearance and tone, she actually has, like every other female member of her family, been waiting for Vaile to come back. She secretly and obsessively fangirls over him, despite never seeing him up till now. She grew up on the stories Savilt told her about their master, and while some of them may have been slightly exaggerated, she believes every word. Usually wielding a pair of one-handed repeater crossbows for ranged engagements and a pair of hand axes for melee, she fights like a wild beast. This is fitting, because over the millennia that passed since Savilt arrived or perhaps awoke in this world, his line has intermingled with no small number of various members of the races. It is said that she has the good qualities of every race, yet none of their drawbacks, making her a foe that should never be underestimated. Duke Melvin Tucko Packard, the hidden blade aimed at the royal family. Description: Melvin Tucko Packard may seem to be a normal, human supremacist noble in the Trelawney Kingdom, yet he and his line are some of the oldest pawns in the tyrant's game. He acts the way he does not out of actual disdain or hatred for Rian, elves or dwarves, but out of the knowledge that doing so brings him and his line closer to the royal family of the Trelawney Kingdom. He and his family are more than willing to be wiped out in the purges that will come after the Savilt and Red Mountain take over the kingdom. He and his line made their peace long ago. Every action he takes is for the sake of ending the cruel and oppressive regime that has his homeland in a tight iron fist. His family have become dukes after many generations of maneuvering and engaging in terrible evil, and now they have themselves right where the rightful king needs them to be. Melvin merely waits for the go-ahead to kill the royal family. After generations of evil and sadism done in order to keep from being found out, Melvin and his family are ready for it to all end and their souls and that of their ancestors to be redeemed for their actions. They know the truth of the old saying, sometimes good men must do evil things to stop evil men from doing even worse things. Trelawney Kingdom's side. Zaratnaru Trelawney, the idiotic, genocidal and supremacist king who rules a nation of idiotic, genocidal and supremacist maniacs. Description: Zaratnaru Trelawney is, For all intents and purposes, a sociopathic psychopath. His family has stood at the top of the Trelawney kingdom for ages and have imposed their human supremacist viewpoint on the whole of their kingdom for as long as anyone can remember. He, like his predecessors, is on very poor relations with the nations that surround his lands. This is due to the wars that he has waged with them in an attempt to destroy the inferior races. As no other nation really wants anything to do with his family, and the families of his nation's nobles, have been interbreeding for far longer than any of them rightly should have. In his family's quest for genetic perfection, Zarek was born with practically everything wrong with him. He is paranoid and sickly, practically impotent, and has the intelligence of a child despite being an adult. He recently became engaged to a new queen from another kingdom, a queen and kingdom that Vaile shares some less than pleasant history with. He may be king, but his advisors run the nation, occasionally letting his childish whims be made reality just to appease him. In his mental state, he is unable to see the tendrils of Red Mountain creeping through his nation. Not that the advisors, the ones with actual power in his nation, are doing anything about it anyways. Jaffia of Dolt, the leader of the king's advisors and the most incompetent person to put in such a role. Description: Jaffia hails from the distant desert city of Dolt and only got his position by being in the right place at the right time. Or so he claims. He is so incompetent at his designated job that when he actually does it, things tend to go poorly for all involved rather fast. Of course, the only thing he is good at is being corrupt and malicious. Whether it be embezzling national funds, creating heartless and sadistic laws, arranging the purging or enslavement of non-humans, Jaffia truly shines. But try and get him to do what an advisor is supposed to do, and he falls flat on his face. He truly epitomizes what his kingdom is: cruel, malicious, despotic and oppressive, but also utterly incompetent at doing anything else. It is almost as if he has a devil on his shoulder telling him what the worst things he can do would be and how to implement them. In fact, the only reason his adoptive nation even stays afloat financially is due to the institutionalized oppression of the other races. And don't get me started on women and minorities, or, for that matter, those the regime calls sexual deviants. Those that ignore the warnings and come to Trelawney can only expect the worst, and boy will they get it. There are rumors that he has connections to a hellish monster of some kind or an evil deity or deities, but such rumors quickly cease due to their advocates going missing in the night. The only part of his whole outfit that puzzles people is his staff, whose head is a reddish magicite crystal. It is said if you look into it hard enough you can see countless faces swirling about. Not that anyone has ever managed to get more than a quick glance before getting their head bashed with it. No one has ever been invited into his personal room and emerged in the same way they entered, be they male or female. All exit as changed people. Even the maids that are supposed to clean his room in the castle seem off, as through they are shells of their former selves, like puppets, dancing on strings. Whatever force that is in his room is too terrible to mention, and seems to need a relatively constant supply of victims. Jaffa has lured people from all over the kingdom to his room, and they all emerged as changed people. You can imagine the rumors that grew from that, but those who spread them end up dead, or worse. Natalie Malavingstron Vaile, the bitch who started all of Vaile's troubles and whom he calls a puke princess. Description: the one who shall forevermore be known as a puke princess managed to heal her face and end the pain that racked her due to a certain Eratan female doing some not so nice things to her. Her kingdom has kept silent about how this came to be, but with puke princess being the only surviving member of her bloodline left and having developed acute paranoia due to her brush with death, she has no other option than to find a husband to keep her line alive. Unfortunately for her, everyone was either taken or wanted nothing to do with a woman who still had scars left from where her face was ripped off. No one save Zaratnaru Trelawney. Due to the terms of her engagement with him, their firstborn son would be the heir not of the Trelawney kingdom but of hers. Naturally, this did not sit well with the mentally challenged monarch, and now not only is their marriage teetering on the brink of collapse, but their nations are preparing for an eventual war with each other. However, so long as Puke Princess, who is now a queen, is stuck in the Trelawney Kingdom. She and her nation will not be able to do anything. All she can hope for is that a window of opportunity opens so she can flee. Vaile awoke from his sleep to discover that, while he was still wearing his outfit, he was completely tied up. He looked around and saw the other passengers, drivers, merchant and guards that had not been marked red all tied up as well. Well, fuck. What happens now? Vaile asked himself inside his head. His question was answered when a rather slovenly man entered the large round tent that they were placed in. He chortled to himself in a disgusting manner as he ran his greasy fingers over his chin and eyed up the women and girls that had been bound and eyed them with visible lust. Be grateful. I, Rupert Dunsey Cap Flagrant, pronounced by himself as a flagrant, have decided to give you an opportunity to serve me. I will take the more beautiful amongst you as my consorts while the rest can bear the children of the Red Mountain Bandits. When he finished, he let out a disgusting laugh that launched spittle as he chuckled. As for the men, well, as long as you ensure your loyalty via a slave seal, I will be willing to have you join as whipping boys and targets for practice. At the very least you will live a bit longer. Ha 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 ha. The faces of those in the tent who were not with the greasy leader were a mix of despair and anger. Vaile, on the other hand, was most confused by a single fact. There were a bunch of men in the tent, the size of an old circus tent, who wore similar outfits. However, the one thing that they all had that was truly commonplace was the signet ring they wore. Out of the people in the tent, only about 3 out of every 7 of them wore a signet ring on their right pinky finger, if they had one, and matching clothes, while the rest were in a mix of beat-up mercenary outfits with no coordination or were wearing clothes fit for nobility. The men with signet rings seemed to be taking up positions and preparing for something. What they were preparing for, Vaile had no idea, but he suspected that they were double agents, or perhaps even triple agents. As for the fact that they all seemed so very out of place among the mix of very uncoordinated and very fine attire broken bar, well, it made Vaile question the intelligence of the rest of the people in the tent. Why could they not recognize the obvious spies in their midst? As the greasy yet fit man in nobleman's attire creepily fondled a bound little girl, the sounds of fighting began to creep in through the opening in the tent. Who is making such racket? The unkempt but certainly not obese creep of a leader demanded. The obvious plants sprang into action and began to effortlessly deal with the mercenaries in the tent before beating up and binding the sharply dressed individuals in the tent. Who? How dare you? I am the tyrant of Red Mountain. You will die for this. I have connections, contacts. You will die in agony. I swear by the gods that you will. Rupert was silenced with a swift roundhouse kick to the face, which made him start bawling like a kid whose candy had been stolen in front of them. You claim to be the tyrant? You don't seem to understand the gravity of what you have been doing, you little shit. A voice that sounded like it came from a man whose lifespan should have ended decades ago came from behind the flap that separated the inside of the tent from the outside. The flap was lifted and a man that looked too old to be alive walked through with the aid of a cane. I am the tyrant of Red Mountain, the old man said with a voice filled with malice and hatred, and I do not tolerate imposters. The men with the signet rings saluted and made way for the impossibly old geezer as though he were a king. The old man stopped before the separated group of women and young girls and took out a dagger fit to be a national treasure. He kneeled down, which must have hurt his joints a fair bit, and cut the ropes binding the girl who had been molested by the greasy fuckwit. Don't worry, child. I won't bite. Besides, if I did, I would just lose my teeth. With a grandfatherly laugh, the man who claimed he was the infamous tyrant of Red Mountain freed the prisoners one by one as Rupert watched his name rolled around on the ground in agony. Now then, the old man stopped when he came to Vaile. He had freed everyone else before him and now Vaile was wondering if there was something wrong with him. Normally you free the people in front first, but Vaile had been ignored so far in favor of freeing everyone else. The old man cut the ropes around Vaile's wrists and ankles. Vaile could have just broken them himself, max-level player strength and all, but the events that were taking place right now were happening so fast he was unable to keep up. As Vaile stood up, the old man got on one knee before him. What are you doing? Vaile asked. Giving thanks and showing deference for my master. The old man turned his head up to face Vaile, his smile seemingly trying to reach his cheekbones. It has been far too long since we last saw each other. When was it? I believe it was when we went to bring Drazku Stormagal and the rest of the Greenskin leadership under you, if my memory serves. But, in case you have forgotten, as you did have quite the number of followers, I am Savelt Roderick Trelawney, true king of the Trelawney kingdom and the tyrant of Red Mountain. Lord Vaile, it is an unimaginable pleasure to have you back. Once again, the name Trelawney gave him da copyright avu, only now he realized why it did so. The main endgame raid before the first expansion. That's where he had heard it. So, a kingdom from the game got put in this world too. Savelt, it really has been too long. But why did you become a bandit? I mean, you were a rebel against the crown back then. But shouldn't you have been more than able to beat the kingdom by now? Vaile hoped he was not making an ass of himself, but his fears were unfounded. Ha. Yes, I certainly could have. By now the kingdom is rotten and decaying. And, you know me, I love to play the long game. I figured that I could wait around both for you to return and for the whole structure to be weak enough to tear down with a good kick to the door, and now that you are here we can begin the process of giving you a kingdom. Vaile was stunned into silence. If he was getting things straight, a broken bar. So, you created a vast criminal empire, systematically corrupted and destroyed order and common decency, ruined lives and livelihoods and more, all so you could take down a kingdom that rejected you and install me as the new monarch? Yes. Genius. No? And you did not think that I might not want rule? Savelt laughed. But who else is fit to rule other than you? You have such a way with people that even monsters bow to you. If you are that good with people, then surely you are fit for a kingly position. Besides, all this work can't be wasted and for nothing, can it? You do want to rule, right? My work wasn't for naught, was it? Vaile wanted to deny that he wanted any part in this whole endeavor, but when he looked at the hopeful face of a loyal subordinate who was obviously on death's door, he could not help but give in and grant one of his tamed beings his wish. Then I will accept this. But I will be a shadow ruler. Never seen or heard, only felt. There will be someone better suited to be the face of the new kingdom. I think you fit the bill. From what I remember, you had the moral high ground, despite being an enemy of the world. No one but you can be fit to act as king, while act as the hidden ruler behind you. Savelt's wrinkly old face lit up like a Christmas tree. To have such faith in me. I am honored, my lord. Truly, serving you was the best choice I ever made. But, alas, I am reaching the end of my lifespan. I managed to last for far longer than I ever thought possible, but I am not like you. I cannot escape the Reaper for much longer. A broken bar instead. Let us have one of my heirs take that place. I know just the one, too. You will love her, I am sure. She is smart, strong, tactically and strategically gifted and has a way with people just like you, among other things. To think, I would not only be a follower of my master, but also his in-law. Vaile's eyes went distant behind his mask as he realized that he would now have to deal with what was probably another crazy lady, just like the 5 down in the underground. Oh, for the love of all that is good and holy, a broken bar, why do these things keep happening to me? Vaile moaned in thought. The Red Mountain Bandits were more than a mere band of outlaws. They were a continent-spanning criminal organization that had their hands in every kind of vice and evil imaginable, save for a few. Prostitution, drugs, extortion, money laundering, vandalism, racketeering, piracy, robbery and more were their domains. In fact, the only major criminal industry they kept themselves out of was the slave trade. To be perfectly honest, the Red Mountain Bandits seemed to be so much against the notion that one member of the races should be property of another, that those who did keep slaves oftentimes tried their best to make their slaves' life as pleasant as possible, despite still being in bondage. It was widely known that treating a slave poorly would result in Red Mountain hitting you even harder than it hit others. Entire noble lines had been ruined in mere months due to mistreatment of slaves, so as a result, numerous nations passed strict laws to prohibit poor treatment and punish those who engaged in it harshly. The only nation to stand firm against Red Mountain was the Trelawney Kingdom. This was the kingdom that Red Mountain was based in. having taken over the mountain that was their namesake, or perhaps it was the other way around and the mountain got its name from them. So why go into this? Simple. Those who had been captured by the fake Red Mountain bandits were all members of non-human races. Rian, elves and dwarves were among those who had been tied up, but no humans. It should have been apparent by now that those humans who were in the caravan had either been with the fake or real Red Mountain bandits, and those who were non-human would have been sold into slavery by the fake Red Mountain bandits when they reached their destination. That would have been the case had the real Red Mountain not gotten involved, which it did. As soon as this was revealed to the freed captives, they realized how massively foolish they had been. Had they honestly thought that the human supremacist nation that was the Trelawney Kingdom would just let them walk away after their merchant caravan entered? Unfortunately, the answer to that is a big fat yes. As it stood, they only had two options available to them. They could either join the Red Mountain bandits or try and escape the Trelawney Kingdom by foot. Neither option seems all that appealing. Vaile mused internally. It was akin to telling someone that they would either need to walk through a heavily mined minefield with a big sign saying shoot me, or join the mafia with the knowledge that if you did you would never be able to get out alive. Unsurprisingly, or perhaps surprisingly, depending on the perspective, the non-humans left over from the caravan were split roughly 50-50 on which choice they made. Vaile half expected Red Mountain to kill those that refused to join Buta Broken Bar. Very well. We respect your decision and will let you go. Your odds are not great as they are now, so take these supplies and this map. May you find a better place to be. Farewell. Civilized himself was the one to send them off, gifting them wagons and pack horses to replace those that were taken, as well as some food, a map and other supplies. The looks on the faces of the people as the infamous tyrant of Red Mountain just gave them the tools needed to flee was one of shock and confusion. This same face was on Vaile, just hidden under his mask. As the non-human caravanners fled from the burning mess that was the fake Red Mountain camp, Civilized smiled and turned to Vaile. Do you know why I gave them those things? Vaile didn't, but did not get the opportunity to say so. I am not like the current line that rules Trelawney. I have always believed that all members of the races are equal to each other, regardless of fictional blood purity and imaginary divine right to rule. I created Red Mountain to fight back against the institutionalized oppression that took the freedom of so many others. But over time I realized that a simple band of freedom fighters would not be effective enough. Civilized sighed as though he had a great weight on his shoulders. Being what we were back then was what turned us into what we are today. Back then there was so much oppression that to even try and fight for the freedom of others made you a heinous criminal deserving of only the death penalty. No one in any position of power was willing to support us, so we got funding and equipment through banditry and the like. Civilized's eyes seemed to look into the distant past, as though he was looking at those who followed him in the earliest days. Eventually we stopped pretending that we were gallant and honorable rogues and got serious. It was then that the long game started. With our organization now free from the limits of morality and ethics, we became so much better at what we were doing. We made those who we targeted bleed and suffer, and one by one the chains began to break. We never could manage to rid the world of that abominable practice, but we at least made the lives of those who were in chains more bearable. There was just one thorn in our side that kept us from truly breaking the chains altogether, and that thorn is none other than my own flesh and blood. Those descended from the bastard who kicked me from my rightful place and turned my homeland into the dystopian nightmare it is today. Civilized spat the last sentence like he was cursing the devil himself. All that I have done has been to break the chains of slavery and destroy the family who created the concept in the first place. Were it not for my own kin, then the yoke of unwilling servitude would likely have been limited to those who committed crimes worthy of it. Now a broken bar. Civilized stopped his rant and coughed. Forgive my old habit, my lord. I tend to rant whenever it comes to this blasted kingdom and what it created. No, number. I totally get it, Vaile said. You may not believe me, but I come from a place where slavery is not only forbidden by law but is seen as a barbaric and uncivilized practice. Aside from wage slavery, that ice a broken bar. Civilized smiled a big, wrinkly grin. Then we are of one mind on the matter. Good. I was hoping you would be so inclined. The Red Mountain bandits had packed up everything that they could, and the outlaws began to move out. They helped Vaile into a heavily cushioned carriage and Vaile followed him in. The interior was, well, modest, quite plush. The walls and seats were padded in order to ease the burden of the tyrant and keep him from feeling too much pain during the bumpy rides. The gang of freedom fighters turned criminal consortium moved on into the deep woods, the light of day dimming fast behind them. Move your lazy asses, you fucking pansy-ass bastards. My granny moves faster than you, and she's been dead and buried for more than 5 decades. The second-in-command to Vaile barked orders at a bunch of new additions to the Red Mountain bandits. They were weak, but she would make them strong. Sure, they had potential to be true elites, but right now they were no use to anyone save as meat shields. Fucking dumb as fuckwits. Nora Vandal Trelawney cursed aloud, utterly dissatisfied with how long it took to whip these nobodies into shape. Mom, we have word from the tyrant. Nora shot a hateful glance at the man who was delivering the message. Well, what does the crotchety old fart want? He has found Lord Vaile and is bringing him here. To save time and avoid patrols they are going through the Krasken forest. They expect to run into minor resistance from the beings there. Their route is plotted on the map if you wish to. Nora rushed past the messenger while handing him the megaphone used to berate the trainees. She got to the magic map room and saw in real time the movements of the Red Mountain caravan as well as its expected route. She took a mental note of it and then hurried over to her personal room and changed into full battle attire before running out of the mountain fortress that she was in and making a beeline towards the Krasken forest. Although she had been moving far too fast for anyone to see it, her face was flush with color and her eyes were filled with joy and childish excitement. She squealed like the fang girl she was as she bolted towards her ancestor and her husbando. As she ran, she imagined all the scenarios she had daydreamed about for most of her life coming true. Vaile sweeping her off her feet and letting her ride some of his tamed beings, maybe even bringing her in close and leaving a lingering kiss on her lips as he serenaded her under the moonlight. Yes, she was like a powerful outlaw version of Fang Earl for a pop star. Not that you could say that to her face and survive, and not that she would let anyone who knew about her crush on Vaile live. Her secret collection of dolls made from her own dyed hair in the shape of Vaile, her stash full of self-authored smutty self-insert fanfics and the fact that she self-tattooed the words "a property of Vaile" just above her lady bits only drove home the notion that Vaile was right to have worried that Vaile would try and give him over to a crazy lady. Don't worry, my one and only, my heart and soul. I'll come to you, and we can be together forever. Vaile felt a chill run down his body. He looked out towards the place where Red Mountain stood through the thick vegetation and tree line and felt a sense of unease build in him. He was getting the feeling that something he would not like was on its way. He was right to be worried. As the Red Mountain convoy made its way through the dense forest, the sounds of the fauna gave way to an eerie silence. This put the whole of the caravan on guard. The forest had been filled with animal noises before, but now it was dead silent save for the sounds of the hooves and feet of men and steeds and the creaking of carts and carriages. As if on cue, the convoy stopped and Vaile stepped out and beckoned for Vaile to follow him. Children of Carnarus, I know you are there. I am Vaile Roderick Trelawney, servant of mighty Vaile. I mean no insult by crossing through your lands. I merely lack the ability to safely travel through the lands of men. By the agreement struck between all servants of mighty Vaile, I have the right to cross through here but will, of course, do so with all due haste. We will tarry in your domain as little as possible. We thank you for your tolerance, great children of the Beast Lords. Vaile stood firm, his eyes focusing on what Vaile's minimap and HUD showed as a beastman of sizable power hiding just out of sight. Vaile checked his minimap and spotted around 80-90 beastmen of varied levels and types hanging around just outside of visual range. While even he could take them on, the act of one of them sounding a horn would cause dozens if not hundreds of beastmen to flood the area, and Vaile did not want to have to fight them all. A massive, fur-covered cloven-hooved man with a wolf head that did not match either his hooves or the feline tail sticking out his rear entered view. The beastmen seemed to be testing the waters to see if the people who had called out were who they said they were. Vaile walked over to the hulk of muscle and sinew and reached into a coin purse and produced a small tribal fetish. The beastman took one look at it and ran back into the dense undergrowth and tree line with the rest of his kind following him and fleeing away at high speed. "What was that?" Vaile asked. Vaile smiled as he stowed the fetish into his coin purse, proof and a deterrence. With that, the two got back into the carriage and the convoy moved on, the sounds of animals once again returning to the woods. Vaile kept an eye on the minimap. Even though the initial group of beastmen had fled at the sight, and perhaps smell, of the fetish, it did not seem to deter other groups from pulling the same stunt. Vaile and Vaile had to perform the song and dance another 5 times before they managed to make it even 1/3 of the way through the forest. "Why do they keep bothering us?" The beastmen live in small tribes and often war with each other for things such as mates, food, resources, sacrifices, territory and other such things. They are not too dissimilar to the races in that regard. They may be monsters, but they are more in tune with the more base and primal aspects of life than any barbarian from the races. Despite what people are told, the beastmen are, in their own way, quite civilized. And that fetish, what does it do? What does it mean? Vaile smiled as his eyes focused on the distant past. "Well, my lord, long ago when your servants came to this world or awoke in it, we managed to find each other and come to an agreement. We would never actively or passively try to harm each other and would grant each other free and safe passage through our territories. Mind you, this did not always work out, but we are all allies to each other and work to benefit not only ourselves but also those who are like us and support us." As the convoy stopped again, Vaile and Vaile exited and prepared to go through the process of sending the next beastman tribe away. This time, however, something was different, and both Vaile and Vaile noticed it. This time, the beastmen did not hide and try to prepare an ambush. Instead, they began to slowly advance through the vegetation and they made themselves fully visible by choice. "Well, we are deep into their domain. Of course, the biggest tribe in the forest would certainly take notice and act." Vaile sighed, took out the fetish and began to talk, but the beastmen kept advancing. They seemed utterly unwilling to abide by the ancient agreement that their forebears made. "Damn it. Looks like we will have to fight this near broken bar," Vaile grumbled. "I'm getting too old for this broken bar." Vaile estimated that the odds of emerging victorious were favorable, but the only survivors would be him and Vaile. "I have an idea," Vaile said. Vaile clambered up to the roof of the carriage and pulled down his hood. The beastmen stopped advancing and seemed to be both confused and slightly in awe. Then Vaile removed his mask and let his trait A reversed attractiveness run rampant within the ranks of both the beastmen and the Red Mountain bandits. Both groups fell to the ground in awe of Vaile's handsome visage. Vaile was honestly surprised that the bandits didn't start puking at the sight of him, but since they were in the bandit archetype of potential foes, Vaile assumed that the logic of the game still applied to them. Then, to further drive the point home and hopefully make the beastmen be more agreeable, Vaile began to speak, his voice sounding like a choir of angels, or their equivalent, to the various beings before him. "Servants of my servants, children of my chosen, why do you seek to break the ancient vow made by those who came before you, those whose names and strength live forevermore in legend and myth, both great and terrible? Do you seek to shame your ancestors? Do you believe that you are superior to the great and mighty being that I am? I am the master of your masters, the sovereign of your sires. Do you truly seek to harm me, you great and mighty master of masters? Answer me, O children of my chosen, whom do you serve, whom do you owe your loyalty to? Is it to your maddening hatred of the races, or to me? Those before you and beneath me are just as devoted to me as you are. They are your allies, so hate them not. Now answer, do you wish to serve me as your ancestors did? Raise your voices to the heavens. Will you take me as your master and follow in the footsteps of the greatest of your kind? The group of both beastmen and members of the races were silent. Then, Vaile rose and shouted in a voice too energetic for a man that looked like him, "Long live Vaile, master of monsters and men. The Red Mountain bandits then rose and shouted, "Long live Vaile!" Over and over. Vaile looked out at the still stupefied beastmen. "So, it seems that the ones you despise are more loyal than you are. How disappointing that the heirs to some of my greatest servants would deny their true calling and nature. I suppose you are not worthy of my—" Vaile did not get a chance to continue as the beastmen rose to their hooves and paws and let out a bellowing roar that shook the forest. Horns were blown as the beastmen let out their cries and stamped their feet as if to show their willingness to serve. "I take it you do wish to serve me. Then let all who bear the undiluted blood of the beast lords know that I, Vaile the great and powerful, yet live. Let the word be carried to all my chosen and their kin. I have returned. Now, make way. I must reach Red Mountain with all due haste. I have an obligation my servants on Red Mountain that I must fulfill, but once that is done, I shall return." Vaile got down from the carriage roof and the beastmen parted and made way for the convoy. Saveult got in as well and the caravan continued on its path, never again accosted by the beastmen. All the while Vaile repeated one line repeatedly in his head. "I can't believe that actually worked." For the first time in living memory, the chieftains and shamans of every beastman tribe were gathered together without a battle taking place. A massive bonfire had been lit and the greatest of every tribe eyed each other with suspicion and unease. "Are you certain?" one of the beastman chieftains asked in his kind's inhuman and guttural mix of grunts, huffs, barks, yips, growls and hisses and various other animal noises. There could be no mistake. It was indeed Vaile, lord of all. "I saw it with my own eyes, as did much of my tribe's warriors." Yet he associated himself with the weaklings of the races. Yes, but as he said, they too are his servants. Or at least the ones belonging to the Red Mountain tribe are. I cannot fathom why he would let the races serve him, yet they seem to do so with as much zeal, if not more, than our kind. "More zeal than our kind? Heresy. I merely state what I have seen." "His appearance matches that of the second figure from your tribe's reports and the stories told about his greatness from long ago. We were so stupefied by his might and majestic form that he questioned whether we were even loyal to him." "You did not even notice it was he who rules all when you saw him." "You are the heretic, not me." A shaman raised his fur-covered hand and the disagreement ended. "You said that he would return." "Those were his exact words?" "Yes, venerable one." "Then tonight we celebrate, for Vaile, lord of all, has returned to our world from the great beyond. He will finish his work with the Red Mountain tribe and then lead us to victory against the Mudbloods." The Aryan, as those mockeries of those with true beast blood call themselves, will fall soon before our might. The lands taken from us will be restored, and the age of Aryan dominance in our ancestral homeland will end. Let all know, the age of the beast has nearly begun. Prepare for the first wild hunt in ages. All tribes must be unified by the time Great Vaile returns. The children of Carnaris will rise again. After passing through the beastman-infested forest, the Red Mountain convoy emerged into a large open field, only to find a rather unwelcome sight. "Halt, brigands! By order of the king, drop your weapons and surrender peacefully or face a brutal end." Arrayed before the convoy was a rather large contingent of soldiers from the Trelawney kingdom. It seemed as though they had foreseen that the Red Mountain bandits would be passing through the area, or perhaps it was just really good guesswork. Either way, the convoy was not prepared to face them, stretched out like a worm as it was. Vaile popped his head out one of the windows of the carriage and then asked Saveult, "Did you make this happen?" Saveult sighed and shook his head. "No, my lord, I did not." "Then how did they find out about us moving through here?" Vaile asked with his stressed expression hidden beneath his mask. Saveult looked out of the carriage as well before settling back in his seat. "I have heard through the grapevine that the Trelawney kingdom managed to somehow create or acquire a relic useful for divining the locations of certain individuals quite a while ago. Maybe about 5 or 6 centuries, if I am not mistaken. Perhaps they used it to locate either you or I and track us." Vaile could not recall such a device, tool or object used for such a purpose being in the game, But that did not mean that in the ages after this new world was made something or someone managed to create one. Such a device would have been game-breakingly cheaty in the VMORPG that he had played. It would have allowed Parkers to know their target's location and grief them to no end. There was no way that the devs would have allowed such a broken device to be made, as it would have let anyone who had it target specific players and or bosses or mobs and just dominate them. There was no way that it could have been a player-owned item. And player-owned items were, by his knowledge, the most powerful objects in the new world. So, there was only one other option, but Vaile could not recall if such a device was ever usable, even for story purposes. A broken bar. Oh, wait, there was that thing, a broken bar. Wait, do you know what they call the rumored device? Vaile asked, hoping that he would not get the answer he was thinking of. Vaile rummaged through his memories and found the answer. Yes. I believe they call it the AI of Sauron. Why do you ask? Oh, fuck. We need to get that thing out of their hands, ASAP. If they use it too much, it could cause immense damage to everything and everyone. Vaile shrugged. I do know that. Up until now, they have been using it nearly non-stop to spy on their own people. At least, spy on those not of a certain court rank or higher. If there was something bad about that device, it should have activated long ago. Vaile brushed off Vaile's declaration. That's impossible. Using it even 10 times in quick succession would undoubtedly open a doorway to a broken bar. Then it hit him. There may very well be a reason why the invasion from Jaina never occurred, despite the repeated usage of the very, very nasty tool. Say, Vaile. Yes. My lord, the ancient Covenant, you and the others who I took in our broken bar were a bunch of demon-looking people of various sizes and shapes hailing from a place called Jaina. A part of that, by any chance? Vaile nodded. Yes, certainly. They were quite cordial too. There was something about how they said see you later that rubbed me the wrong way, though. Well, that explained it. Vaile sighed a sigh of relief and calmed down. Then he remembered the large number of soldiers outside. So, how are we going to deal with the guys stopping us? Vaile smiled. Rule number 1 of being a successful revolutionary force: prepare and plan for every possible and impossible scenario. It was at that moment that the sounds of battle began to drift in, along with the faint aroma of blood and bile. Accompanying these sounds and smells was a feminine yell that sent shivers down Vaile's spine. My dearest beloved, I am here for you. I won't let these filthy little shits hurt a hair on your head. You are mine and mine alone. Vaile leaned his head back and closed his eyes. Great, he thought. Another crazy lady who wants me. Why is it always crazy ladies? A broken bar. Nora had arrived just as the Trelawney Kingdom's soldiers had finished forming up. She was still out of their sight range but was close enough to let her absurdly superior senses pick up everything. She could distinguish each individual's heartbeat from the others and could smell the sweat and bow coming from them. What the fuck could these fucking fucks want? What are they doing here, keeping me from rushing to my beloved Vaile? Just as she was about to rush in and start massacring the soldiers, she overheard an undesirable conversation. So, are you sure that the tyrant of Red Mountain will be coming through this area? Yes, 1,000 times yes. Do you not trust the information given by the Inquisitors? It's not that. I am a loyal and devoted man. I just find it odd that the tyrant, who never leaves that damnable stronghold, would just go out to a random place, dick around in the beastman-infested forest and then emerge right back into our lands. The way is quicker through the forest, although why the bastard would do such a thing is beyond me. He was probably trying to cut the time needed to get back to base by a decent percentage. Is it true that some being of high strategic value is with him? Dunno. Either way, no one leaves here alive. Whether the being they are transporting is important or not is irrelevant. Whoever or whatever it is, it will die all the same. Nora processed what she had just heard for a while before coming to the realization that they were not only going to try and off her ancestor, which she wasn't mad about, but that they were also going to try and kill the object of her crazed obsession. Not gonna happen, you shits. I will fucking bury you. She nearly screamed that and ran towards the unprepared soldiers before another idea struck her. She should wait until her darling Vaile was in danger, then swoop in and rescue him. He would thank her and kiss her and hug her and then they would. Halt, Brigands, by order of the king, drop your weapons and surrender peacefully or face a brutal end. The command of the leader of the soldiers boomed out thanks to a magic tool. Nora waited and prepared for the sounds of conflict, but after a few moments she got bored and rushed in with the fury only a deranged and psychotic hardcore superfan can exhibit. After first sending a few rounds from her twin one-handed repeater crossbows accompanied by several area of effect magical projectiles, she then switched to her twin hand axes and rushed towards the mass of soldiers. My dearest beloved, I am here for you. I won't let these filthy little shits hurt a hair on your head. You are mine and mine alone. With that battle cry, she entered the fray and danced to the sounds of flesh and bone being cleaved and the screams of the dying. Nora whirled like a whirling dervish, her hand axes ignoring the armor and shields of the Trelawney Kingdom's soldiers like a guillotine passing through thin air. With each movement, body parts were sent spiraling through the air and blood flowed like a macabre fountain. As she moved, the lines that were once prepared to face off against the tyrant's forces blossomed into red flowers of blood and gore. If Vaile had watched the reactions of the kingdom soldiers, he would have been impressed by their ability to adapt, because mere moments after Nora got to work on the army, it and its commanders realized that Nora was a problem that needed to be dealt with. Trumpets sounded to signal movement orders and the rear half of the army turned about face and tried to stop the crazed woman that was tearing them apart. However, Nora's attack had sent ripples through the whole army and, with it being as small as it was, roughly 3,000 men strong at most, the impact was intense. The moments of confusion that the army experienced were just enough to allow the rest of the Red Mountain convoy to seemingly form a wall with the wagons, either between or behind which the Red Mountain infantry stood. They think to use carts as a breakwater. Advance, and don't worry about our rear. The men behind us will deal with the best. One of the commanders, a relatively high-ranking noble, spurred his horse forward and the rest of the other commanders and men followed closely behind. They stepped towards the Red Mountain line in a march that slowly sped up the closer they got. When they reached 400 meters, they broke into a disorganized sprint with the horse-mounted commanders rushing ahead. The Red Mountain line raised some bizarre wood and the metal object and pointed them at the advancing line of kingdom soldiers. Then the rear of the wagons, which is facing the advancing line of kingdom troops, opened up. And then, there was thunder and death. The Red Mountain line spewed out a loud cracking sound and billowing smoke and, for some bizarre reason, over 300 men fell to the ground in either their death throes or in mortal agony. The large, tube-like objects in the carts did the same not too long after, and with an even louder roar and plume of smoke, more of the soldiers of the king fell. This time, they were not bleeding from relatively smaller holes, but now they had massive chunks torn away. The object in the wagons turned and second metal tube billowed out smoke and death. Then it rotated again and unleashed the same. After the first volley had been fired, the Red Mountain bandits had pulled out two more of the strange thundersticks, albeit much shorter and smaller versions, with one in each hand. They held their fire until the soldiers were nearly on top of them before unleashed their fire into the mass of troops. Holstering their smaller thundersticks, they drew their mix of various weapons and countercharged the soldiers. Of the roughly 1,500 men that began the charge, only about 700 made it to the Red Mountain bandits. Against the uneducated brigands they were facing, who numbered only about 200, it should have been an easy victory, but it wasn't. A broken bar. Red Mountain bandits generally fought harder and better than any soldier of the Trelawney Kingdom. Years of learning their craft taught them how to deal with multiple, well-armed, well-armored and well-trained opponents. Besides, even without that, these were Savolt's personal guard. Savolt had only ever picked the best of the best of the best for this position and personally broke anyone among them who got lazy. They were more disciplined than the soldiers, more tactically and strategically minded than the soldiers, and had far more experience dealing with dangerous situations. Compared to the glorified town guard they were facing, it was no contest. Savolt's personal guard were kitted out to make the best use of their capabilities. Their specially made studded leather armor was not only more durable than the standard steel that made up the armor of most of their foes' defenses, but far easier to move in. Unlike the one-size-fits-all breastplate worn by the soldiers, each one of the Red Mountain Bandits had custom-fitted equipment and fought not with mass-produced and cheaply made iron spears, but with weapons and tools that suited each of their styles personally. The soldiers had expected that there would be no resistance worth noting. What they got was fight worth seeing in an action flick. The 200-man force of Red Mountain Bandits not only held the line but began to push back. Ideally, the Trelawney Kingdom's soldiers would have gone for an encirclement, but the Red Mountain Bandits had cleverly positioned themselves between a small, yet deep and fast-flowing river and a bunch of rocks that seemed to stretch deep into the beastman-infested forest. The soldiers could navigate neither, and thus were funneled to a killbox and then to an unsustainable, Thermopylae-style battle. A broken bar. Where are the commanders? Where are the nobles? We need to retreat. Someone, give the order to retreat. The meat grinder churned through the bodies of the Trelawney Kingdom's soldiers as they were pushed from front and back. From behind them, their own comrades surged towards the Red Mountain Bandits, heedless to the fact that they were doing more harm than good. From in front, the small group of brigands reduced anyone who got close to a broken or shredded corpse. Suddenly, a wave of horrible sickness swept over the lines of the soldiers. It was as if something truly abhorrent, something so twisted and monstrous that the very air putrefied in its presence stepped forth into the world. Then the sound of an instrument began to sound out, if something so disgusting could be called one. More abominable instruments began to join in, and the voice of some hideous mockery of all things in existence boomed out over the sounds of soldiers vomiting. And now, a song for you, my foes, sung by yours truly, me, Vaile. By the love of the gods, what kind of monster made that a broken bar? The Trelawney soldiers looked up, and then nearly passed out due to the sheer ugliness of what they saw. Your king's a bitch. He's a big fat bitch. He's the biggest bitch in the whole wide world. He's the shittiest bitch if there ever was a bitch, and he's a bitch to all the boys and girls. A broken bar. Vaile had decided to actually participate in the fight. To some degree, he had managed to get his bard's secondary profession up to maximum in the game, so he knew how to play and how to sing. He clambered up on top of the carriage he was in and surveyed the battlefield. There it was, in all its glory, a sight he had seen many times in the game. The broken bodies of multitudes strewn about like autumn leaves, the red stains of blood seeping into the land. It was also broken bar nostalgic. Of course, he only experienced this when he was forced to use his tamed beings to fend off groups of Parkers and NPCs, but the sight did make him remember the good old days. Well, time to get to work. Vaile popped a skill from the bard's secondary profession that let him use multiple instruments, one-man band, and then began to partially disrobe. First, off came his mask, then came most of his other ability-sealing garments. The smell of vomit soon accompanied the other scents present, but Vaile paid it no mind. He had a show to perform, with a few simple bars and a mere 39 words. The whole of the Trelawney force, even those still fighting the crazy lady, passed out with foam spilling from their mouths, their ears bleeding and their eyes having rolled back into their heads. Vaile surveyed the damage his inherent ability had caused and shrugged. What? Am I that bad? I didn't even get to finish the song. What a terrible audience. The Red Mountain Bandits, who were entranced by Vaile's singing and appearance, only began to move once Vaile put his outfit and mask on again and deactivated the skill. Savel stepped out of the carriage and looked at his personal guard, then at the bodies of the unconscious soldiers. What are you waiting for? He bellowed in his old and hoarse voice. Kill them. They dare to show that kind of reaction to Lord Vaile's performance? What do they deserve? The cry of death, death, echoed out from all still conscious, aside from Vaile himself, and the slaughter began anew. Gotta kill am. When they're down, I guess a broken bar, Vaile muttered as he slipped back into the carriage. Vaile could hear the sounds of weapons impacting flesh and bone from the carriage. Obviously, the fact that his performance did not go over well with the Trelawney Kingdom soldiers did not sit well with the Red Mountain Bandits. His altered rendition of a 4 decades old song from an adult show, now relatively tame for modern standards, had caused the soldiers to froth at the mouth and fall unconscious, while at the same time heavily buffing the Red Mountain bandits that heard it. Not that such a powerful buff was needed with their enemies trapped in a comatose state. Vaile secretly prayed that whoever the crazy lady who had screamed earlier was, that they would not come over here. His prayers were in vain, however, as the door to the carriage he was in was ripped off its hinges and a woman stared at him with a demented grin on her face. Vaile was startled by the sudden exposure, but the woman did not seem to pay his emotional state any mind. She first started a weak laugh that quickly grew in intensity until she was cackling like a witch. The deranged look that covered her face combined with the psychotic laughter was not something Vaile wanted to see, and he hurriedly opened the door on the other side and tried to get out. Just as he got the door open and stepped outside, he was tackled from behind with enough force to send him and the woman who tackled him flying several meters. Vaile tried to squeeze out of the vice-like grip that held him, but the crazy lady had wrapped her arms around both his body and his own arms. Escape was impossible and resistance was futile, but that did not stop Vaile from desperately struggling like a caterpillar caught by a mantis. The crazed woman rubbed herself all over Vaile's back while giggling like a loon and mumbling things that Vaile could not hear. Vaile had endured enough and looked over to Savilt, who just seemed to beam at the two of them like they were fated lovers exchanging kisses beneath the moonlit sky. "Savilt, help me!" Vaile's cries fell on deaf ears as Savilt seemed to ignore his distress. To make matters worse, the crazed woman who had him in a vice grip seemed to believe that Savilt was, in fact, going to remove her from Vaile's presence. "Hey, you shitty old man. Don't you fucking dare touch us." Savilt ignored both of them and walked back to the carriage with the aid of his cane. To be young again. A broken bar. Vaile was very uncomfortable. As if the constant rumbling from the carriage going over uneven terrain wasn't bad enough, he now had the crazy lady from before holding him way too tight. Both doors to the carriage had been either ripped or blown off their hinges by said person, and said person was rapidly switching between rubbing her face on him and giving malicious glares at Savilt. "Seriously, what the fuck is this?" Vaile mumbled. "Honey, is something wrong?" the woman responded. Savilt merely chuckled at the two of them. "Savilt, who is this person?" Vaile asked. Before Savilt could respond, the woman interrupted. "Oh, of course you wouldn't tell my honey about me, you damn crusty bastard." "I'm a broken bar." "She is my descendant." Savilt repaid the disfavor the woman showed him. "She is the one who I told you about, how you were perfect for each other." The overly attached bandit lady clicked her tongue and stole a harsh glance at Savilt. "Darling, I am Nora Vandal Trelawney. Don't pay that old fart any mind, you only need to concern yourself with me, and you." "Yeah," Vaile retorted in his mind, "I need to be concerned that you might try and kill me, you mad woman." A man on horseback trotted up to the doorless carriage. "Sir, we are reaching the foot of Red Mountain. Shall I send some to go ahead and announce our return?" Savilt nodded and was about to speak, but Nora interrupted him. Yes, go on ahead and tell them to prepare for my wedding with Darling." The horseman did not budge or pay heed to her words, which seemed to anger Nora to no end. "Go on ahead and announce our arrival," Savilt said while smirking at Nora. "And you won't need to prepare for a wedding just yet." The horseman nodded and replied, "Understood," before riding off ahead of the convoy. "You damn geezer. Why are you ruining our moment?" Savilt smiled. "Because, dear Nora, wouldn't you rather have a royal wedding?" Nora's face contorted with anger before switching to confusion and then one of realization. "Wait a Vaile damned minute. Are you seriously saying that we have, as you so eloquently put it, reached the endgame? It is seriously almost time for all-out war?" "I thought that a broken bar." Savilt's smile grew wider, and even though his face looked kind and grandfatherly, there seemed to be a hidden malice behind his old eyes and grin. "All the pieces are nearly in place, my dear. All we needed was to get our lord in position, and now he is. I do believe it is time to take the final moves in this several thousand years old game I have been playing. Soon, the line of my brother will end in fire and blood, and you, my dear child of my children, will ascend to the throne alongside our lord." Savilt rubbed the crimson gem that was the handle of his cane. "We just need to make sure the last few obstacles are eliminated." A broken bar. Savilt coughed into a handkerchief and quickly stowed it away, but not fast enough for Vaile to not see that it was stained with blood. "Hey, Savilt, a broken bar, are you okay?" Vaile asked of one of his tamed beings with serious concern. I've still got a while in me left, more than enough to see this through." Savilt flexed one of his old arms to make a show of his health, but deep in his heart of hearts Vaile knew that Savilt was on his last legs. "I guess the only reason he lasted this long was to see me. Like Odysseus' dog, he waited for me to come back, even beyond what his body could reasonably endure." Vaile mused sadly. He did not want to see one of his tamed beings die in front of him. Despite the fact that they were merely bits of code before, now they were real people, with real ambitions and motives. He had never cared when it was a game, for it was all ones and zeros. This had allowed him to act in whatever way he wanted. None of it was real, so why would it matter if he was a dick or not? But, in the reality outside of the game, Vaile had been a softie. Now he was feeling something he had not ever expected to feel. He was a forever single virgin. He never even had a chance at being a father nor the desire to be one. Yet, when he looked at Savilt he felt something tighten. Years of power leveling his tamed beings gave him intimate knowledge of their abilities, and Savilt had seen him through an entire expansion before being retired for others. For a split second, as he looked at Savilt, memories that were not his own flooded him. Vaile was glad he had his mask on, because the emotions from these memories combined with his own and sent tears down his cheeks. Savilt wasn't dead yet, but he could not evade the Reaper forever, and Vaile would have the displeasure of watching someone he cared for pass on before him. The journey up the mountain was smooth. In fact, it was far smoother than Vaile anticipated, mostly due to his prior experiences with things in this new world. The roads that snaked up the towering natural edifice were remarkably well thought out and maintained, not to mention also well defended. Roughly every 2 kilometers there was an outpost of some kind, either simple and made of wood and dirt or more complex and made with stone and what could only be described as medieval concrete. Even before you would reach one of these outposts there would be traps both concealed and obvious. A tree perched in a precarious position, so that if a cord is pulled it will fall down and block part or all of the path. Patches of thorny bushes that would force advancing movement into kill boxes. Rounded boulders and wicker balls covered in tar, fat and cloth that could be rolled downwards into the flank of an invader. These and more were visible to the attentive and skilled eye, and Vaile had a sneaking suspicion that he, lacking a primary job/class that specialized in such things, could only see the tip of the iceberg. At every outpost the convoy passed, there were flags hung and people standing at attention, which was odd because these people were all supposed to be cutthroats, vandals, highwaymen and the like. The seeming incongruity between what little Vaile knew about the people here and their behavior filled Vaile with a sense of confusion, and the show was only getting started. The higher up the mountain range they went, the bigger the outposts became until they were the size of, for medieval times, large towns. Each settlement that was passed through had people lined up alongside the path. Rather than saluting, these people who seemed to be more civilian than bandit were kneeling and seemed to offer prayers. Vaile couldn't figure out for the life of him what that meant, until they passed a church that just so happened to have a finely detailed statue out front. A statue of Vaile himself. The statue's base was covered in offerings, bouquets of flowers, and had candles and incense bearers nearby like it was some sort of shrine. All it took was for Vaile to see that, and he began to put 2 and 2 together. He turned to Savilt and asked him the question. "So, I'm a god?" Savilt nodded as Nora snuggled closer, sending jealous glares at every woman they passed. "Of course you are. Someone who can take any foe and make them an ally, who can control the very beings that could have brought about the apocalypse, who resolved crises without killing leaders and brought unity to countless disparate factions. What else could you be other than God?" "So, I'm God, not a god?" Savilt chuckled. "That is up for debate." Vaile watched the people as he passed them. "And you never thought that maybe, just maybe, I did not view myself as such?" Nora spoke up this time. "Oh, darling, you are so humble, so great and noble and powerful. yet you try and lower your grandeur to that of the people. Savilt nodded. It seems my descendant speaks for me. Don't worry, my lord, we all know your true nature and will bring word of your boundless humility to the masses. Vaile wanted to refute them but realized that it would be futile to argue with these fanatics and resigned himself to his treatment. How do I keep getting into these messes? He asked in his head, far from the ears of those who could hear his displeasure. A broken bar. They were reaching the highest peak of Red Mountain, which in and of itself was less a single mountain and more a mountain range. The heavily fortified medieval city seemed to have been made by shaving off the peak itself and building the city on the stump, as Vaile could not see any evidence of there being a true peak. Then again, maybe the mountain was naturally flat, which wasn't something impossible but merely highly improbable. Then again, this was a world that seemed to have lifted several things from the VMORPG he had played, so it wasn't as unlikely as what Vaile first thought. The game sometimes had places that the players could not reach, but ingenious players would manage to reach regardless by glitching. Most of these places were just test zones, but most normally inaccessible mountain peaks just kind of flattened out when beyond view and usually had no texture. Such a thing might have affected this mountain range, but Vaile had no idea if this was the case. Either way, the top was flat and covered in medieval cityscape, including a rather imposing fortress at the farthest edge. Vaile secretly dreaded the fact that the doorless carriage would have to travel through the streets. Vaile was not one for the limelight. He preferred to stay out of sight and just have fun, but he had either been forced to or tried to go against his introvert nature several times in the past, and the crowds that were gathering were causing him no small degree of stress. Vaile had been very uncomfortable as the convoy had passed through the prior settlements, the mix of attention and cobblestone roads causing his anxiety to build up. Now the crowds were massive, and while the roads were better there was still the chance that he would get an anxiety attack. Breathe, man, breathe. It's just a cinematic, it isn't real. They are just NPCs, man. You can do this. Just breathe, you don't have to look at them. Just keep facing forwards. Vaile repeated the advice his therapist had given him on Earth in his head. Sure, viewing real people as NPCs was normally a bad idea, but Vaile wasn't the kind of guy to treat people as trash just because they were NPCs. The therapy had helped him socialize a bit and was the main reason he actually had the gear he did. He had been so morbidly afraid of interacting with people until then that he was barely even able to go outside. After that help, he was able to expand his horizons from single-player games to multiplayer and then to massively multiplayer games. Without that help, he would never have been able to get a job, go to college, or even go outside his tomb-like apartment. He had been a shut-in for several years until his family, caring as they were, stepped in and got him help. However, he still sucked with massive crowds of real people, especially people who looked up to him. He never had experience with people looking up to him in such massive numbers, let alone having tons of people worship him as a god. How long till we reach the stronghold? Vaile asked. He wanted to get out of sight and get somewhere where he could cool down and try and distress. Not long, Savilt replied. It will take another 20 minutes at this rate. Why do you ask? Do you wish for more people to have a chance at seeing you? Vaile did not want to tell Savilt and Nora that he was close to having a mental breakdown and instead gave the best excuse he could come up with. I need to use the men's room, ASAP. Nora and Savilt were surprised for a moment before nodding, and the procession moved a bit faster. They reached the stronghold in only 10 minutes instead of 20 and exited the growing crowds just in time for Vaile to avoid a full-on mental break. Vaile was escorted to a lavatory and he closed the door behind him, locked it and sat down. He did not need to do anything aside from calm down and relax. And sometimes the shitter is the perfect place to do so. As Vaile had discovered long before this moment, no one judges you when you are in the toilet alone. The only thing you have to worry about is people asking if you had complications if you take too long, and a simple excuse is often enough to end all inquiries. No one really wants to know what you did in there. At least, no one who doesn't have a really bizarre kink. So, Vaile sat on the ceramic bowl and went through the steps that his therapist had taught him, and 20 minutes later he emerged to see Savilt and Nora waiting outside the door. Did you guys really just stand around for 20 minutes and listen for me to do my business? I wasn't aware you had that kind of kink, Vaile joked as he was escorted away to a broken bar somewhere. The sound of a metal goblet impacting the forehead of someone rang out through the throne room, followed by the incoherent screeching and screaming of a man who was so heavily inbred that it was painfully obvious just by looking at him. The man thrashed around like an infant in the midst of a violent temper tantrum, despite being over 30 years old, but no one admonished him for it. His wild screeching turned into a rambling and train of thought rant that was routinely interrupted by yet more bouts of childish fury. This man, clad in the finest of robes despite crying and flailing like a toddler, was the king of the Trelawney kingdom. Millennia of inbreeding had resulted in the form that he took, a true marvel of what eugenics does to animals and plants alike. He had a jaw that jutted out in a massive underbite that never was able to stay closed, resulting in him always drooling. Both of his eyes constantly wandered, and either he had no control over them, or he did not care enough to maintain it. One of his arms was longer than the other by about 4 inches, and both of his hands were too misshapen to even clutch his cane or scepter. He had a hunchback that twisted him slightly to the side, and one of his feet seemed to have been put on backwards and at an angle. These were just a few of the visible signs of his pure-blooded pedigree. The less visible signs made themselves known at almost all hours of the day. From his random breaks into animal noises and inane ramblings and rants to his utter inability to engage in meaningful conversation and many, many others, it was obvious that it would be best for his line to die with him. Unfortunately for his nation, its people and any children he may eventually have, his line had existed unbroken for ages, and no one in the court had any intention to end it anytime soon. His once great line was, by now, nothing more than a line of puppets to the far less inbred, yet still remarkably inbred, nobles and advisers. Who was this freak of a king? His name was Zarak Trelawney, first of his name and likely the last. What few moments of clarity he experienced were filled with mad ramblings that were the hallmark of his kingdom. They consisted mainly of rants about genocide, slavery, torture and other nasty things, all directed at a non-human trash. Yes, it was not just the king and his court that were so genocidally inclined, but the masses as well. This was a well-known fact to the wider world, but remarkably there were still some boneheads who thought they could trade and do business with them without dying, or worse. Despite their obvious racial differences, there was a near 100% chance that a non-human entering the Trelawney kingdom would not emerge alive/intact once encountered by a citizen. So, why had the king thrown such a tantrum, you ask? It is simple. The force sent to apprehend the tyrant of Red Mountain had been utterly crushed, despite the numerical advantage they had. The man whose head had been hit by the gold goblet was the one who organized the attempt, who had, for quite a long time, been a proponent of using cheap, conscripted peasants armed with mass-produced spears to overwhelm any enemy force. His ingenious strategy had been a failure numerous times, but he always had people survive who he could throw the blame on. Not today, as the entire force had been wiped out to a man. No survivors meant no one to take the fall and earn the king's ire in his stead. So, he was being carted off for a public execution while the rest of the court and advisors simply waited for the inbred freak of a king to calm down and be relatively easier to deal with. It might take minutes, or hours, or even days or weeks, but eventually Zarak would calm down and forget all about the past. So, they waited and schemed in silence about how to take advantage of the failure and exit of one of their fellows and how to turn it to their advantage. A broken bar. 3 days later, and the king was still in the midst of his tantrum, only stopping to eat, drink and sleep. He raged in all other situations, even on the toilet when no one was around to hear him. Still, this gave opportunities for the court to scheme aloud, for when the king entered one of these fits, he quickly lost track of reality, or what little of it that he was aware of. In a candlelit room far from the crying king's gaze and ability to hear, the advisors plotted. Chief among them was the one who had the king's ear and acted as his voice. He was known as Jaffa of Dolt. He was a man from a far-off land that he claimed consisted mostly of vast deserts and occasional oases where settlements were founded. He claimed that his home city of Dolt was a beautiful city where gardens hung in the sky and that he had been cast out for trying to make it a human utopia. Whether there was any truth to that remained unclear. The man was supposed to make the nation function properly by following the every word of the king, yet every time he tried to do so his changes would end poorly for all involved. So, after trying and failing enough times, he simply decided to be corrupt and, lo and behold, he actually managed not to fuck things up. So, a new status quo was set and Jaffa could not be happier with his large, unwilling slave harem, mountain of embezzled funds, illicit narcotics, personal pleasure city and thousands of yes men. However, for the first time in a long time, the gathered personages were discussing something not related to corruption. I take it the eye has been used again. Where is the blasted tyrant now? Jaffa twirled his long, thin mustache that ended in braids near the base of his throat, the rest of his facial hair forming a goatee that was perfectly maintained. Yes, my lord. The eye has been used repeatedly, as much as possible to ascertain the location of the tyrant, and we have found that he has already made it to Red Mountain. Good, good. Jaffa nodded sagely, his black, ruby-studded hat preventing him from moving his head too fast. And what of the interloper? They are still with the tyrant? Yes, my lord. We know not their name, but we are able to track them all the same, just like the tyrant. If we only knew their name, we could actually get a better picture of them. But all we have are faded outlines and silhouettes. We can't even get a read on its voice or scent, but what little we can make out had put people into a near coma. Jaffa let a sinister smile creep across his face as he twirled his moustache. Excellent. May I have a try at the eye? I have a hunch that my knowledge gleaned from the libraries in my homeland may provide the name of Thesa Brokenbar interloper. You may, my lord. You have granted us such wonderful gifts that it is only fair that you are allowed to use the eye. Good, good. Then make an appointment for me. I have to prepare. Jaffa strode out of the room and went straight to his personal quarters. He locked the door with every one of the 15 different locks and sealed the windows closed while blocking out the outside with heavy curtains. He confidently walked over to a dusty old mirror that was covered with a heavy blanket and tore off the cloth. The mirror was foggy and reflected nothing, despite looking perfectly fine to anyone who could have seen. Jaffa smiled as he looked into the mirror. The only thing beyond the fogginess that could stand out to anyone viewing was that there was no reflection of Jaffa, let alone anything in his room. RTKSRV marked DSVR, Szvkim. The utter nonsense coming from the right hand of the king would have astounded anyone who heard it, as it seemed as though Jaffa was speaking in tongues. The man he got down on one knee and bowed, his hat sticking onto his head despite the odd angle. There was silence for a time, but anyone who could have looked into the mirror would have seen what appeared to be black flames filling what appeared to be a room behind a glass screen. Jaffa's eyes went white, then black as he listened to something. After a while, he spoke again. The flames vanished and Jaffa took the blanket and covered the mirror with it. His eyes had permanently changed from the brown he had originally to the color of an old scab. He walked over to another mirror and looked at himself. Ah, the foolishness of the races knows no bounds, Jaffa said to himself. Laughing cruelly, he turned and picked up the cane that he had left on the ground near the covered mirror and looked into the magicite crystal that was its head. If one looked close enough, they could see what appeared to be thousands if not tens of thousands of faces appearing and vanishing deep in the blood-red gem. Among them was a face that was remarkably similar to his own. No, it was his own. But if he was in the crystal, then who was standing there? Jaffa, or whoever was in his body now, smiled a predatory grin as they unlocked the door with magic and walked outside to set the final pieces in motion. Their masters had a grudge to settle, and they were selected to enact their bloody vengeance. With the unknowing aid of one of their master's longtime acquaintances, that is, the tyrant of Red Mountain had schemed for so long, but no one schemes better than an infernal. A few pieces needed to be put in their proper place, a few actors needed to make their entrances and exits, and lastly, The stage needed to be set for the true ruler of the infernals to take control over this place. After all, the sinful souls here had been a broken bar dealt with. They were really looking forward to meeting Vaile, the being powerful and terrible enough to have the entire top 5 echelons of infernal society worshipping him. A peek was all they needed to make sure that everything was in order. A feeling ran through their body that was altogether unwelcome. Ducking into a bathroom, they dropped their pants and looked down. Fucking Vaile, damn it. I forgot their body was Mally broken bar. Vaile found himself in a large room, seated at a table that showed a large magic map of the continent that he was on. Based on his knowledge of the full dive morph he was spirited away from, Neon Genesis Fantasia, he could recognize some parts of the landmass, despite never being to them in this new world. The vast badlands of the Green Wastes seemed to have been dropped right next to the elven nation called the Helen Sanctuary State, which was bordering a large hellscape called Pandemonium Dis. All 3 of these places and many others were either added in expansions or were vanilla, but the one thing that connected them all was their random positioning. There was no rhyme or reason for their placement, and geographers and geologists would have torn out their hair trying to figure out how a desert, a jungle, a vast mountain range and a blasted wasteland could border each other as though there was a literal dividing line keeping them from bleeding into each other. At least the placement of places in NGF, Neon Genesis Fantasia, made sense, but this was like witnessing border gore on a far more absurd scale. Vaile was so busy speculating about how the hell the world's ecosystems have not collapsed that he didn't hear the talking around him. "Did you get that, my lord?" A mix of Savolt's words and a gentle shaking snapped Vaile back to reality. "Sorry, I was just examining the map." "Then I will go over it." Savolt did not get to start or finish his explanation as he was overcome with a potent coughing fit that saw him nearly collapse onto the map. "Savolt!" Vaile grabbed his tamed being before he could fall and supported him with his shoulder. "Someone, call a healer," he shouted just as one entered. Savolt was laid on a stretcher and taken away to his personal quarters, leaving Vaile and the rest to try and figure out what to do next. Nora seemed to be in the loop, and as Savolt's second-in-command she was the next person in the chain of command. All of Savolt's duties temporarily fell on her for now. Despite having been visually standoffish to her ancestor, she genuinely looked worried. Vaile wondered if she was actually just acting the way she did because it made her seem like a rebel, but now was not the time for speculation. "Mom, what are your orders?" one member of the Red Mountain leadership asked. A broken bar. Nora stood, looking at the door that Savolt was taken out through. "Mom?" Nora looked slightly down for a brief moment before seeming to get a hold of herself. "The old man's plan still stands. We follow it to the best of our ability and hope the cards we have in our hand trump those of the kingdom." She pointed at a military base surrounded by a series of rectangular walls. Vaile looked at the map and saw over a dozen forts similar to it in a rough line, all connected by a singular wall. It looked similar to the fortifications of Hadrian's Wall from Earth, just with more medieval aspects and a bit of magic thrown in. "Vaile, dear, listen up. I don't want to repeat myself. I am not like the old man." Vaile nodded. "Okay, so that fort has the weakest garrison and has several gaps in its defenses that we can exploit. However, the second we attack it there will be a call to arms along the rest of the wall and the other forts. On top of that, the settlements near the area will send reinforcements to aid the defenders, or what few remain. As strong as we are, we can't deal with the militia." "Why? They should be less well armed and armored than the soldiers, and they wouldn't be trained nearly as well, either." Vaile brought up what he thought was a valid point. "No, we can't butcher them." "Do you intend for us to rule a nation of corpses?" Nora was not acting anything like the crass and wild rebel persona she had put on. This was who she was when all responsibility had been forced onto her. Nora scratched her head. "How the hell are we going to deal with the forts without dealing with the militia?" she mused aloud. Vaile was stumped as well, but then a light bulb flashed in his head. "Wait a minute. I think I got something," he said as he brought up his list of tamed beings. Vaile scrolled through the massive list and, with the new map data from the magic map in front of him integrated into his own internal map, he was able to track the location of several of his tamed beings. Or rather, He saw multiples of them, many multiples of them. He closed his eyes as he tried to enter group chat with them, and lo and behold it worked. The sounds of confusion on the other end ceased as Vaile explained his situation and the connection these descendants of his tamed beings had with him. He half expected them to rebel, but perhaps their lineage forced them to submit to him, because they immediately wanted to follow him like their ancestors. These were not humanoids, or legendary monsters or beasts. No, these were wild animals of various kinds. Wolves, big cats, snakes, bears, boars and other animals that, in the right numbers and situations, could cause a lot of trouble. He was even able to locate the descendants of a few cows, sheep, pigs, chickens and goats and roped them into his little plan. After finishing giving his orders, he looked up and told the people in the war room what he had arranged. As he explained his plan for how to deal with the wall, the looks on their faces went from confusion to disbelief and finally to a look that screamed, "This is crazy enough that it just might work." A broken bar. At first Nora could not believe her ears. Vaile had explained that he had control over roughly 89% of all animal life and 93% of monster life in the entire Trelawney Kingdom. He said that with a single command he could cause the whole of the nation's animal husbandry system to collapse, and that with but a word he could cause a stampede the likes of which the kingdom had never experienced. Sure, if he ordered it, the vast majority of the beings he commanded would die, but that was the price that needed to be paid. He did say that he would likely only get one shot with this, and that it was incredibly painful to do what he had done, but if they played their cards right they could hit the weakest link in the Trelawney wall and push through to deal with the other forts long before the kingdom's militia, soldiers and government managed to deal with the chaos caused by Vaile's command. She was now convinced by what the old man had said. Lord Vaile is not like us. He is a kind soul, but not unwilling to do terrible things for those he cares about. He may seem a bumbling fool at times, but he always manages to come up with a plan that works when the time is dire. He is a good man, not like us at all, and I don't expect him to stay as king. You shouldn't expect that of him either. Spend your time with him while you can before he moves on, and make sure to learn what you can from him. Way back when, he was quite the dangerous foe for his enemies. Then again, you have to be that inventive and imaginative to deal with a world out for your head. Just put him in a no-win situation and watch him find a victory that benefits him and those he cares for. Nora watched as the love of her life altered the magic map and nearly gasped in amazement as nearly 84,000 markers for allied troops popped up all over the Trelawney Kingdom. Hoping her old man would be able to see the victory before passing on, she smiled and said a sentence her ancestors had spoken time and again. "Oh yeah, it's all coming together." All Nora had to do was wait for Vaile to recover, and they could begin the revolution. After the war council was finished, Vaile excused himself and went to check up on Vaile. He found his old tamed being in a hospital bed, rather than in his quarters. Vaile looked a broken bar, bad, worse than he had looked when he first met Vaile after his arrival in this new world. Vaile truly looked like he had but a few hours left to live, yet the old man was cheery as could be despite his terrible condition. Even as he slept, he had a wide smile plastered over his face, as though he was in a pleasant dream despite the pain he should have been feeling. The healers were busting their asses and working in shifts, pouring every bit of their mana pool into healing him before nearly passing out and trading places with someone else. 8 healers were at his side at all times, trying desperately to keep their leader from slipping off his mortal coil. As Vaile approached, Vaile's eyes fluttered and opened and he turned his head to his master. "I had hoped that you wouldn't see me like this so soon." A broken bar. Vaile's words were barely a whisper, but Vaile caught everyone. "Rest. You need it. We'll take care of everything. Don't worry, you'll get better soon." Vaile tried to tell Vaile that he would make it, but Vaile weakly shook his head. "I won't. I had hoped to stand atop the broken realm my brother cast me out of, but it seems I must leave this task to the younger generations." Vaile could not find the words he needed. "My lord, Please don't mourn for me. I lived a life far longer than I should have and got to fulfill my long-held wish to see you again." Vaile raised his arm with what little strength he had and motioned for the healers to leave him. "I will not be kept at the brink of death like this." Vaile had hardly known Vaile, yet he felt some sorrow at this turn of events. Nora entered and saw the healers not healing and was about to accuse them of treason, but Vaile stopped her. "Nora, I pass the mantle to you. Make the most of the power, knowledge and cunning you have and lead Red Mountain to victory. I leave everything to you. Now, let me close my eyes and rest one last time." Nora tried to approach but Vaile held his arm out to stop her. "He doesn't want to be trapped on the brink of death for forever. He has more than earned his rest." Vaile got down on one knee and held Vaile's hand. "I barely knew you, yet you leave so soon. What few memories I have were great, and what feelings I have are sorrowful. I will be here for you, in these final moments. Don't worry, I am here." Vaile smiled and settled in his hospital bed before closing his eyes and relaxing. His breath slowed and it seemed as though sleep had taken him. Still, Vaile held his hand as the breathing slowed further and then ceased. Still clutching Vaile's hand, Vaile took a quick glance at his list of tamed beings. Vaile's name was grayed out. Vaile placed Vaile's hand on his chest and stood up. The looks he saw on the faces of the people around him seemed to ask the big question, to which Vaile answered by closing his eyes and giving a slow nod. Nora in particular seemed to be in the middle of several stages of grief at once. She was most visibly angry, and Vaile suspected that anger was directed both at Vaile for dying and herself for acting the way she did around him. It seemed as though the bubble would burst at any moment, but she excused herself from the room before then. Vaile almost followed after her but decided against it and stayed behind as Vaile's body was covered in a shroud and prepared for his funeral. A broken bar. It had been 4 days since Vaile, the tyrant of Red Mountain, had passed, and there was already talk of power struggles. Nora had locked herself in her room, and even though Vaile's funeral was to be held in a few hours, she refused to respond to any requests to honor her familial ties and personal responsibilities. Vaile was not going to let everything his tamed being built up come crumbling down due to his death, so he made himself ready to force his way into Nora's room at any cost. The door was locked by a series of potent spells, deadbolts and chains, but it was nothing a short-range teleportation skill could not get around. The countermeasures to such an act could have gotten him good, if he had not prepared for them ahead of time. Despite the alarm that was screaming at everyone in the room, Vaile could not see any sign of Nora. He ventured through the room, or rather, series of rooms that made up her suite. Each room seemed to have a designated purpose, and Vaile eventually reached the room that had a life sign in it on his minimap. Nora's bedroom was protected by yet more security measures, but Vaile was able to circumvent them with decent speed and ease. While not specialized in those categories, he had been forced to deal with his share of security features in the game. He wasn't good, but he wasn't bad either. He just needed time and resources to deal with the weak, by late-game standards, locks and magic security measures. He slowly pushed the door open and entered the bedroom. Nora wasn't here either. Strange, thought Vaile, she should be in here. The minimap says a broken bar. Vaile realized his blunder and walked over to a wall that had a definite lack of anything on it. It was completely unlike the other parts of this room, in that it was barren of anything and everything, even paint or plaster. My guess is that this has a hidden door. Now where to find the way to activate it? Vaile scanned the room and located an arrangement of letters from the English alphabet. This was the only thing that stuck out to him as out of place, as the jumbled letters were all out of order. Looking closer, he noticed a pattern. Can't be broken bar. Vaile pressed the letter AV, which resulting in a clicking sound and the letter being wreathed in a blue glow. It can't be that simply broken bar. A. I. L. E. After pressing those letters in order, the wall that was barren sank into the ground. It was not a rotating door or a swinging door, rather it was an elemental door. Vaile sighed at the fact that anyone who knew a thing about the Red Mountain Bandits would know the password, but anyone who got this far would have earned the right to an easy puzzle. Now, what's behind door number 1? With trepidation, Vaile entered the hidden room and turned a corner and saw Nora grieving heavily over what could only be described as a Yandere girl's shrine to her beloved, which in this case was Vaile. Nora turned to lash out at whoever had entered her sanctuary and saw Vaile slowly backing out. "Yeah, broken bar, I think I should just wait outside," Vaile managed to stammer before being thrown onto the bed by Nora. Nora held Vaile down with strength that seemed out of place for one of her build, yet the residual parts of the game made it so that she could easily do so. Vaile tensed up and fully expected Nora to try and disrobe him, but Nora did not. Instead, he felt the soft wet droplets of her tears fall on him. He opened his eyes and saw Nora trying, and failing, to hold back her tears as a look of pain and loss covered her face. "Why can't you all just leave me to my grief?" A broken bar. Nora had sealed herself away for a broken bar she didn't know how long. All the hours seemed to blur together as she tried to console herself in her quarters. However, everywhere she looked there was something that reminded her of Vaile and the fact that she had repeatedly been a massive douche to him. She had always expected that he would outlive her, but for him to die the very day her beloved got here broken bar. She was a bit of a tsndeer in the regard that she acted antagonistic to her ancestor but had really cared quite deeply for him. All her attitude and rude behavior was a front so that she could seem tough and worthy of respect. But deep down she was still just as enamored with the legend that was Vaile as anyone else. She just had a more personal connection to him than any other person. After trying to find a place where she could shut out the anger that she felt towards herself, she entered into her sanctuary. However, the second she laid eyes on her shrine to her beloved, she broke down. The old man, Vaile, had raised her on stories of Vaile's exploits. He had told her heroic tales about Vaile rescuing people from death, people who were hostile mobs, saving princesses, that were hostile mobs, and denying terrible and merciless people their ill-gotten gains, taming/stealing mobs and raid bosses from under the nose of other players. If there was one thing that reminded her of her lack of foresight more than anything else, it was the shrine to Vaile that she had built over the decades. And now she was looking at it. She did not even notice when the hidden door closed, when the alarm bells indicating an intruder rang or when the hidden door opened again. What she did notice was the sensation of someone sneaking up behind her. She wheeled around and saw Vaile looking at her. She did not register his words and instead tackled him out of the sanctuary and onto her bed, which was entirely coincidence and good fortune. As if they landed on the floor someone could have been injured. Every time she tried to speak or open her eyes, she thought of Vaile, which led to her thinking about the tales told to her by Vaile, which led to her remembering how much of an asshole she had been to him and how she would never be able to ask for forgiveness. It took all she had to try and hold back the waterworks, but it still wasn't enough. Her sniffling was audible even to her. And as she tried to deal with the emotions swirling inside of her she could not bring herself to move. A broken bar. Vaile was running out of time to get Nora to the funeral. It was only a matter of 4 more hours before the service would begin, and if Nora did not show up then a costly power struggle would be inevitable. Vaile was almost out of options, so he tried his best to deal with the situation at hand. "Here goes nothing," he thought as he forced Nora off of him and onto the bed. This seemed to have the desired effect, as it stunned her for just long enough for Vaile to sit up and hug Nora tightly. Nora tried to stop Vaile, but he refused to let go. "Just let it all out." But no buts. "I am here, so take my shoulder and let it all pour out." The next few seconds seemed to drag on for eternity, but a sniffle from Nora signaled the beginning of the healing process. She burst into tears and sobs as she held Vaile tightly. A broken bar. An hour had passed, and Nora was now far more composed. The knowledge that her grief was not seen as weakness seemed to help a lot. She still had Vaile wrapped tightly in her arms and the occasional sniffle and tear would either be heard or roll down her face. Vaile would have been fine with it. Vaile's words caught her off guard. "What?" "Your actions and words." He would have been fine with them. "Do you really believe a man as old and as capable as him couldn't see that your actions and words were not how you truly felt?" Nora almost started sobbing uncontrollably again. But I was a broken bar and I never got a broken bar." Vaile patted her on the back, Then do so now. Get prepared. Savelt's funerary service is in 3 hours. If you don't show up, then a civil war is destined to happen. You can't imagine the number of people who tried to get me to support their group or faction as the illegitimate heirs to the tyrant. So, you need to put on a tough face for a while before showing that you really did care for him. Any sane man would be able to see that you did not feel the way you seem to if you show up and wear your emotions on your sleeve. Vaile pulled away from Nora. I will head over there. You should get changed into appropriate attire. Nora tried to reach out and grasp at Vaile, but he had already teleported away. Nora looked down at her hands before clenching them. She took a deep breath, got up and walked over to her walk-in closet. She had to choose the appropriate attire, as Vaile had put it. A broken bar. Vaile entered the large cemetery and made his way to the place where many had gathered. Savelt's body was in a casket made of the finest wood and coated in a varnish that only kings could afford. However, if he could have seen the people around him, his own subordinates, plotting and scheming and preparing for the whole organization to shatter like glass, he would have rolled in his coffin. As Vaile got closer, several toadies tried to solicit him for his support, but Vaile ignored them and pressed on closer to Savelt's body. It was morbidly funny, Vaile thought, that in the game a corpse would just poof into a lootable item, but in this world you actually had to deal with corpses that were not undead. Sure, there had been corpses in the game, but they were always just scenery. This new world, however, played by entirely different rules. Minutes passed and then an hour, and Vaile still had seen neither hide nor hair or Nora, the true successor to Savelt's legacy. He was beginning to wonder if she even intended to keep the Red Mountain bandits from splintering, but then a hush fell over the crowd of threats to the legacy of Savelt. Vaile turned around and saw the crowd part. Nora was walking through, her face covered in a mourning veil and her body covered in black leather, metal and fur. The outfit would not have looked out of place on the body of a warrior princess mourning the loss of her father, as it was both functional and aesthetically pleasing to the eye. Her two folding semi-automatic one-handed crossbows were holstered at her hips alongside her two-hand axes, all of which were plainly visible from the front. On her back was a black cloak that was rimmed with white fur that had black spots throughout it. She was pulling no punches when it came to presentation. Above all of this was the face that even her veil could not hide the obvious signs that she had been crying heavily. In fact, there were still a handful of tears streaming down her face every now and then. She approached Vaile and took his arm, and Vaile listened in delight as the talk of breaking apart the organization or trying to take control of it turned immediately to accusation of disloyalty and treason. Vaile leaned to Nora's ear and whispered something to her that made her smile a bit. "I have the names, you have the authority to pass judgment, and they have the gall to try and return to the fold after plotting insurrection. After this, I don't think I will mind if you teach them who the new tyrant really is. Just don't expect me to wonder, watch or listen. I'm not a Sadid, after all." The priest gave a nice speech and several other people did as well. However, Vaile was getting annoyed at the majority of them. They had near openly talked of seizing power or fracturing the organization just a few tens of minutes ago, and now they were talking about how they would help the Red Mountain bandits stay around at the side of the new tyrant. Their speeches were a mix of doublespeak, attempted brownosing and detailed stories about how they were always oh so very loyal. The bullshitting escalated with every eulogy, as it seemed to all that Nora was listening intently to each word spoken. They were all a bunch of idiots to assume that Nora was not the least bit as capable of discerning fact from fiction as Savelt was. After a good 30 or so people tried to spin-doctor their way into the new regime, Vaile took his turn. Stepping up to the platform, Vaile cleared his throat and was glad that his outfit hit his face. "A long, long time ago, in a land far, far away, I was just a man hated by the world. Every day was a struggle to try and survive. It was very difficult to even attempt to grow stronger. I managed to find comrades not in other people like me, but in those who were despised by the good people of the world, monsters, demons, beasts and nightmarish and eldritch horrors so great and terrible that to look upon them would shatter the mind." Savelt, at that time, was being hunted by agents and adventurers working for his twisted bastard of a brother. It was something of a mark of honor that I managed to not only find him first, but also save his life. I managed to tail a group of adventurers and then sneak ahead of them. Lo and behold, by the time they arrived to fight Savelt, he was already out of their reach and their mission ended in a failure. I had stolen adventurer targets from the jaws of oblivion many times before that, but this time in particular was one that filled me with pride. It was then that a beautiful friendship was born. Savelt was one of the few members of the races that saw me and did not try to kill me. For a while he was my ace in the hole, a being far more powerful than I was and who was more than capable of dispatching any who tried to take me down. However, all good things must come to an end. The threats grew larger and more potent, and Savelt began to find himself out of his weight class. Still, he was there for me when I needed to give newer threats that existed in a state like myself a good beat down. I nearly lost him a number of times, but he always managed to endure beyond the limits of what should have been possible. I remember fondly when he and I took down an entire city's guard and every citizen who joined in after I was forced to retreat through the area unprepared. I remember how he single-handedly saved me from death against a full squad of powerful adventurers whose strength would far exceed S rank in the modern days. When I needed muscle that would not cause alarm, he was there. When I decided to get payback on an adventurer clan that had been a massive thorn in my side for a few months, he was one of the heaviest hitters. No doubt he told you stories about me and my exploits, but if I know anything about him it would be that he heavily downplayed his own roles in many of them. I couldn't steer a ship at all, so he did. I couldn't hold off adventurers on my own, so he did. If I ever needed something or someone beaten to a bloody pulp in the early days, guess who was the man for the job? I owe Savelt more than any of you can possibly imagine, which is why my heart aches with sorrow and rage as I stand here. I hate the fact that I got back here only to see him bite the big one shortly thereafter. I hate the fact that he did not get to finish his big, multi-millennia plan to destroy the legacy of his brother. But what I hate the most is that some people thought they could use his death and his descendants' grief to tear his hard work apart. If Savelt heard what I had, he might have just clawed his way out of death's embrace to teach said traitors a lesson. I will never forget my original ace, my earliest and the most powerful friend among the races, and I will never let his great work be unraveled by the short-sighted. Farewell, old friend. May the world you go to be better than this one. Unlike the other speeches, there was no golf clapping or nodding at the end. Vaile had made it perfectly clear what his thoughts on the people attending the funerary service were, and those who were guilty of what Vaile so eloquently called a treason knew that since Vaile was the apple of Nora's eye he could and probably would have them either killed or removed from their positions. At least, that is what they assumed. Vaile had no interest in taking the reins and was more than content to have Nora do what she wanted. Maybe it was just because Savelt and the Red Mountain bandits were more human-like than the Rattan, but Vaile empathized with them a far bit more and was more willing to get angry over things of this nature. Vaile had no interest in ruling anything. His new desire was simply to travel around and see how his tamed beings and their descendants were doing. If they needed help, then sure he would do so, but only until they crossed a line. That was why he left the Rattan under Empire. After all, they did not just cross the line, they tore it up and used it as toilet paper. That, and he did not want to be repeatedly raped by Amazonian rat women while under perpetual house arrest. He may have enjoyed some kinks, but being used as breeding stock for sadistic rat monsters was not one of them. A broken bar. As Vaile sat down, Nora rose and walked to the speaking platform. She let her eyes sweep over the crowd and made sure to make a mental note as to the identities of the ones who looked the most perturbed. Let's see you people squirm, she thought as she kept her rage at their betrayal from forcing its way out of her. She was going to make them regret their actions, one way or another. They would pay for their attempts to undermine everything that the old man had built. Their lust for power had been taken too far, and now that they had exceeded their limits they would fall. And she would make sure they fell hard. For now, she thought, let's see how long it takes them to realize what I have in store for them. I wonder if they are observant enough to notice what is going on around them? Nora cleared her throat and gazed out from behind her mourning veil. Of the 100 or so high-ranking leaders out there amongst the crowd of people mourning the loss of Savilt, a very vocal minority had tried to stir up trouble. She made a mental note of the particularly egregious offenders for later and began to speak. I was born to a legacy I fully assumed that I could never truly inherit. The line of Savilt had gone on for so long and intermingled with so many others that I likely should not have had the strong connection to his bloodline that I do. Perhaps by some twist of fate, my power is great, owing to the randomness of genetics and perhaps the luck of the draw. My siblings were born so weak that they died shortly after birth, and it was expected that I would face the same fate. Yet, here I stand, not only as strong as many of you, but much more so. Savilt taught me everything I know. He raised me on legends and fables that told of Lord Vaile's greatness, and I tried to emulate that through my deeds. I quickly realized that I was not cut out to be a tamer, and rather than being angry with me for failing, he taught me martial arts and helped me grow and evolve my fighting style into what it is now. I was not the most agreeable family member he could have had, but despite my crassness and rude behavior, I truly cared for him. The old man, as I called him, deserved a better heir to his legacy than me, and I was sure that he would live long enough to get it. Savilt was ancient by the time I was born. By all rights, he should have been in his grave long before I was even a sparkle in the eyes of my parents. Perhaps it was his power that kept him alive, or maybe he was just too stubborn to die before Lord Vaile returned to us. Either way, he outlasted his children, grandchildren and great-grandchildren as well as those that followed them. I personally like to subscribe to the too stubborn to die theory, but no matter what the truth was, I fully expected him to outlive me. Yet, here he lies. He sleeps eternally now in a coffin fit for a king. Savilt should have been king a long time ago, and he would have been had his bastard of a brother not ousted him and installed a regime built on genocide and suffering. So, we do what we can here to honor him as the rightful king of the Trelawney kingdom that he was. Here he shall sleep, beneath the cold earth and in a mausoleum that was built ages ago but never used until now. Yet, even as he took his last breath, there were those who sought to destroy his great work, not just to take control of the organization he built but shatter it into pieces that could never be put back together. Such people, in any other group, would be called traitors and given the punishment befitting of the crime. However, I am not above forgiveness. As Nora said that line, Savilt's personal guard, now Nora's personal guard, entered the cemetery and began to apprehend the traitors. I believe that, had Savilt not died, you would have remained loyal to the end of your days. As such, I am willing to give you a chance to prove your devotion and allegiance. To honor the mercy my old man was known for, I will not have such traitors killed. Instead, they will be stripped of power, position, connections and wealth and will be forced to climb the ranks as if they had just joined. Any who seek to give them back what they had stripped from them, however, will meet with the full and unbridled wrath I now can muster. Nora nodded at the guard who pulled the traitors away from the funeral and out of sight. Savilt would have rolled in his grave to hear of these events had he already been buried. That so many who were so loyal would turn against Red Mountain so easily is a stain upon all of us that we may never be able to remove. As the new tyrant of Red Mountain, I fully intend to fulfill my great ancestors' dream. The Trelawney kingdom will fall, consumed by the flames of revolution, and from its ashes we will build something better, a nation where all are free, where no chains bind anyone and there truly is justice for all. I ask that you prove that you are still loyal to Savilt's dream, to my dream, to our dream. I may not be as good as he was, but I will lead us to victory. Nora raised her right arm in the air and clenched her fist. For Red Mountain, for freedom, for Savilt, the Trelawney kingdom must fall. The crowd was silent. But then Vaile stood up and emulated Nora's pose. For my friend, for the dream, for a better tomorrow for all. Hailed the tyrant of Red Mountain. One by one more people rose from their seats and repeated the line, hail the tyrant of Red Mountain. Nora looked over the mass of over 5,000 people, now 34 traitors less than before. She felt a surge of pride and a sense of accomplishment at what she had done. She had, with the helpful nudging from her beloved Vaile, pulled Red Mountain from the brink of destruction. She would have to create some new policies regarding succession and the right to claim the organization, among other things, just to prevent this kind of situation from happening again. She was glad that Savilt had taught her the intricacies of paperwork, rulership, governance, economics, politics and more. Had he just focused not teaching her things she was interested in, she would have been unprepared for his death. Mind you, she still was, but she was more able to deal with the mess that was before her than she could have been. Nora stepped down from her soapbox and took her off her gloves. She ran her hands over the lacquered wood that made up Savilt's coffin and then placed her hand on his chest. "I will never forget you, old man, and I will make sure that your legacy lasts long after you are entombed." A broken bar. The rest of the funeral went as one would expect for a member of royalty. Savilt's body was preserved via magic for a good 2 weeks after the funeral began, so people could look upon their former tyrant as he lay in an eternal and peaceful slumber. It was not just people from Red Mountain who came to pay their respects. The patriarchs and matriarchs of smaller crime groups that were effectively puppets of Red Mountain came to offer their condolences and to offer their allegiance to the new tyrant. Nora had to deal with no end of ceremony and ritual needed to make sure that they obeyed without question. However, she still needed to show her power, and what better way to prove she was worthy of her mantle than to finish what Savilt had begun. A week after Savilt had finally been entombed, Nora gathered the top brass, and Vaile, and the end of the current line that ruled the Trelawney Kingdom began. The wall that separated Red Mountain from the majority of the Trelawney Kingdom had stood for generations. Those who manned its ramparts and those of the forts that were attached at precise intervals were supposed to be the best of the best and the most loyal of all. This was true for the most part in the first few generations, but slowly the lack of any attacks made the guard lazy and overly relaxed. After 5 generations the post became less of a risk and the more of a place for RR. The wall was weak, but at a moment's notice all forts in the area could be called to fall upon any who attacked even one section of the wall. Yes, this post was for the A superior soldiers, but what A superior meant nowadays was the rich, influential and powerful. Fortunately for them, they were allowed to bring their personal retinues with them, which artificially inflated the numbers of active guards. There was, however, one fort in particular along the wall that was the worst offender of the bunch. It was filled with soldiers who were effectively on leave despite being on duty. In fact, it was less of a fort and more like a walled Las Vegas analog for the nation. It was also the weakest link in the chain, and due to its gambling parlors, whorehouses and bars, it was the perfect place for Red Mountain to begin setting the framework for their attack. The fort was positioned poorly, and its walls had too many blind spots. It had no moat, and due to the state of the environment the ramparts were short and stubby. What made it even worse was that despite the shitty soil there were once caverns running underground that were filled with monsters, and several of the cave entrances popped up right inside the fort. Savilt had discovered this weak link ages ago and had been working to make sure that the wall went from being a dangerous post to one more desired than any other. Yes, the very reason the wall was so poorly defended now was due to the manipulations of the very foe it was designed to keep out. It had taken Savilt and Red Mountain centuries to get everything ready, from bribing the power players and setting up secret smuggling tunnels to getting certain structures moved into just the right places. The weakest link in an already weakened chain was about to face the might of Red Mountain. But first they would have to deal with an uprising of an unforeseen nature. A broken bar. It was 2 hours to midnight as a group of soldiers stumbled out of a 24/7 bar called the Subway. They had drunk their asses off and squandered a good week's worth of salary to get this hammered, and they were barely able to stand. They had downed bottle after bottle of stuff far better than they had gotten at other posts, and in their drunken stupor praised their luck for landing them in this place. As they passed a stray dog on their way back to the barracks, one of them got the bright idea to try and feed the animal his half-eaten sandwich. Letting go of the shoulders of his comrades, he fell to the ground and lay in the mud for a bit before getting up and stumbling over to the canine. The dog looked at him and approached as the guard offered his now mud-covered sandwich. He tossed the morsel to the animal and watched it devour the dirty food through his beer glasses. Then the dog approached, wagging its tail as it moved closer. "Huzig dog," he slurred as he reached his hand out to pet the feral animal. Then the dog leapt and sank its teeth into his throat. With a quick shake of its head, the stray tore the guard's throat open and then moved to try and take down the next one. "Fucking wah!" One of the other drunks tried to back away and draw his sword, but he was too wasted to do anything of value and merely fell backwards and cracked his head open on a stone, killing him instantly. The dog ignored him and attacked the third drunk and managed to bite down on his arm, barely missing a vital artery. This guard was less drunk than the others and managed to pull out a dagger from his belt and sever the stray's spinal column. The dog fell limp to the ground and left the soldier clutching his bleeding arm. Thankfully, the alcohol dulled the pain and the guard tried to seek help. However, a broken bar. "What the hell?" He managed to spot the approaching eyes of other strays, both cat and dog alike. Worse still, there were domesticated cats and dogs among them. He barely got out a scream before they descended on him. Little did he know that the scene was playing out all over the Trelawney kingdom. As if controlled by some fell hive mind, animals and monsters were working together to cause as much chaos and damage as possible. Small tribes of feral dragonkin, lizardmen, kobolds, dinosaurs, beastmen and greenskins, orcs, goblins, trolls and ogres, were ransacking small settlements while wolves and other predatory beasts attacked towns and cities already under attack from domestic animals. Cows and horses were attempting to trample Trelawney citizens while birds of all sizes tried to peck and scratch anyone in the open but out of reach for the other animals. The rising of the monsters and beasts lasted hours until the animals seemingly broke free of the spell placed upon them and went back to acting as usual. The monsters, on the other hand, continued their assaults until 5 days later when they were finally wiped out or driven away. However, by that time Red Mountain had already capitalized on the chaos and somehow managed to get a massive force to pop up inside of several of the forts that made up the wall. By the time the chaos that the animal rising caused had been dealt with, Red Mountain had already secured a decent section of the wall and had already dismantled or destroyed a fairly large amount of it. To make matters worse, the guards in the forts nearby suffered from an unknown affliction that made them unable to leave the toilet for very long. Everything they ate seemed to further their suffering, and it was only after Red Mountain had completely destroyed a good 20-mile stretch of the wall that it came to light that their food and water had been laced with potent laxatives. Once the soldiers had dealt with that problem, they finally marched to deal with the bandits and brigands. When they got to their destination, though, they discovered that the bandits had not only torn the forts and walls down with incredible speed and efficiency, there was nothing left for the kingdom to even use as a stopgap. Worse still, the bandits had already moved on and were rumored to have split from a single massive horde of over 100,000 to several smaller and more mobile hordes numbering at least 10,000. The kingdom's soldiers trudged on in their massive line, the whole force of over 60,000 of them, all taken from various bases, trying desperately to catch even one of the roughly 10 smaller forces. As they moved on, they got messages from lords and provincial rulers across the kingdom. Aside from the demand that the army drop everything and come to them immediately, there was mainly one basic parallel between all of them. Towns and cities all over the kingdom were in a state of anarchy, or as the savage mob was chanting, a revolution. 2 months after Vaile had been rescued by Squick, and 3 months before Vaile met Savelt, a woman in regal garb scratched at the edges of her face. If one looked close enough they could see the incredibly thin line that seemed to outline her countenance, the scar left from having her face torn from her body by a rat monster. As the last surviving member of her family's royal line, she was able to become queen of her nation. The problem she faced was her lack of one, pun intended. Thankfully, her father's father had done a great service to the Elven King, whose line owed a department of gratitude that she cashed in on. An experienced flesh sculptor, what we would call a magic-based plastic surgeon, was sent to heal and undo the damage, but unfortunately for the new queen of the Stranvale monarchic state, the agents used by the rat monster were too hard to fully remove. She had a face again, but it was not perfect and constantly itched, especially at the edges of where the knife had cut around her visage. The former princess, now queen, who Vaile had dubbed a puke princess, ultimately stopped choosing most makeups due to the constant itching making her scratch away the applied product. Unfortunately, she could not stay atop her role as ruler of her nation forever. Her nation was a strict patriarchal nation, and her even being in her position was seen as taboo. There would have been others to take the throne in her place, but all of the archdukes and dukes and basically anyone with a hint of royal blood aside from herself had been butchered by the rat monster during a botched execution. So, what was Natalie Malevingstrand Vaile to do? She was, in the eyes of most other royal families, damaged goods. Due to her scars, she was not even worthy of a fourth or fifth son from the other kingdoms. She had no one available to have a child with in order to preserve her line and succeed her. If she could find someone willing to marry her, she could at least attempt to have a son or two and allow her nation to have a king, no matter how young. Well, that wasn't entirely true. There was one king who had no heirs nor a spouse, a king who was so genocidally inclined, just like his ancestors, that he was rumored to be absolutely mad. She really had no other options but to try and get a marriage with him. Anything to keep the bloodline alive. She had no idea what kind of a mess she was getting into. A broken bar. 1 week before Vaile met Savilt, Natalie cursed herself for thinking that marrying this adult mutant was a good idea. She had been treated poorly in her own nation before, but the way she was treated here was exponentially worse. In her homeland she was seen with mixed views. She was the only member of her nation left alive that still had royal blood in her veins, but she was also a woman. Here she was viewed less as a person and more as a breeding sow, locked in her manor that was more of a prison than anything else and forced to try and get the impotent and deranged lunatic that was the king of the Trelawney kingdom to mate with her. The manor's guard were entirely Trelawney soldiers, as her own had died off one by one in accidents. She could see the outside world beyond her barely gilded cage from her bedroom window and made every effort to try and get in contact with her people. Messenger birds were shot down and cooked, then fed to her while being stuffed with the notes she sent or had sent to her. Letters were intercepted and either destroyed or altered. Magic was blocked, so not even the might of a dozen archmages working together could communicate with her. She hated every moment that the deformed and inbred hick of a kin came to her. Demeaning a play eventually devolved into downright torture and rape. In fact, she had overheard that the king was bored with her and was going to let her be a breeding bitch for the higher-ups in his court. After a few years of that, she was going to be turned into a toy for the military to use as they saw fit. After that they were going to send her broken body back to her nation and use her infidelity as an excuse to go to war. Natalie cried herself to sleep when she heard these things. The walls were closing in and the noose was tightening around her neck, figuratively speaking. Of course. She prayed from that night onwards to any god that would listen. Someone, anyone, any god or devil, deliver me from my fate. I will be whatever you demand me to be, I will do whatever you demand me to do. Please, save me. A broken bar. 3.5 weeks after Vaile met Savilt and just under a week after Savilt was buried, 3 hours before the revolution begins. Natalie paced in her room. She had been confined there for 3 days and fed a meal that her enchanted necklace told her was filled with potent aphrodisiacs and agents designed to force her into a constant state where she would always be ready to have a child. She had refused to eat any of it, tossing it all out through the barred window. She was starving, but she would rather starve to death than become nothing more than a breeding bitch. She looked around for anything in the room that could be used to kill herself. She would rather die than face a moment of this torture anymore. Unfortunately, there was nothing in her prison cell of a bedroom that could be easily used. An hour passed and she took her sheets and began to make a simple noose. It would be another 4 hours before they checked up on her again for a medical examination. Bullshit. It was to see if she was doped up enough to be a mindless fuck toy. She would go out on her terms. To hell with everyone, to hell with the world. Then she heard the sounds of a struggle outside. The sounds grew in intensity over a relatively short period of time and caused Natalie to wonder what was going on. Perhaps her people had gone to war to rescue her. She finished setting up her noose so that if worse came to worse she could just end it and looked out through the thin window. Then she saw a sight she could not believe. Beasts of all kinds were rampaging through the land beyond the walls. She could see bears, wolves, elk, birds of prey and even livestock and domesticated dogs and cats causing absolute havoc outside. What made the sight even more outlandishly bizarre was the fact that these animals, both predator and prey, were working together and using their strengths to counterbalance their weaknesses. Squirrels and other rodents swarmed guards inside the walls as raccoons made off with the keys to the gates, no doubt going to open them. Soon after, the guard dogs sprinted into the area and began to ragdoll the human guards with their powerful jaws. She barely managed to pull away from the window and shut it in time to stop a seeming horde of spiders, centipedes and rodents from entering. She could hear the scratching on the other side of the metal-plated wood shutters even as she backed away in fear. The scratching died down shortly thereafter and she began to do the exact opposite of what she had wanted to do weeks prior. She barricaded herself in the room, even going so far as to strain her muscles in the act of pushing a wardrobe in front of the door. It was a good thing she did, too. Almost as soon as she did so she heard the sounds of the door being clumsily unlocked, soon after followed by the noises of various irritated animals as they tried to force the heavy metal-plated door and thick oak wardrobe open and out of the way. Natalie nearly threw out her back pushing against the wardrobe to keep the animals at bay. But her suffering paid off as the critters got bored and left. Natalie once again got on her knees and prayed to whatever god, angel or devil that would listen. But her prayers fell on deaf ears as the mansion and many other places throughout the Trelawney Kingdom were overrun by animals and monsters. She should have been thankful at the end of the day that the manor was not burned down, and while she starved for 2 more days afterwards she finally ventured outside to see both the carnage and lack of obstacles left in the wake of the attack. The rising of the beasts was over, and the domestic animals were back to their old selves as if nothing had happened. Wasting no time, she stuffed herself with food from the untouched larder, packed a lot more of it into a wagon, hitched a horse and got the hell out of Dodge. She hoped she would get to her nation before anyone noticed her absence, but in truth the Trelawney Kingdom had bigger issues to deal with. Red Mountain had attacked and broken through the wall that separated them from the kingdom almost 3 hours after the rising of the beasts began. The revolution had begun. What do you mean, the people are revolting? Are you saying that they are disgusting? Because if so, you are correct. But, if not, then a broken bar. One of the aides to the king who ruled the Trelawney Kingdom slammed his hands down on the round table at which sat the other aides. I mean exactly what I said. The nation is ablaze in the fires of rebellion and insurrection, no doubt caused by some devilry of some kind. Of the men seated at the table, only the one who had just spoken seemed unconcerned with the mass outbreak of insurrectionist activity. That man was Jaffa, the right hand of the king and the one who had more control over the kingdom than its own monarch. Why are you so collected? Can you not see how bad this will be? Oh, I see how bad it will be, only that it will be bad to those beneath the concern of the powerful. I see no reason to weep, the fires will burn themselves out in time. Those on the right side of history, the victorious side, will be the ones to emerge triumphant. The fall of that twisted and evil ideology is inevitable. The wicked that started all this nonsense will be swept aside and in their place the ones truly worthy will prosper. Leaning back in his seat, Jaffa watched as the rest of the council debated what to do. The fools, all of them are fools. The will that controlled Jaffa's soulless body thought to itself, if they had even the slightest bit of the divine power they claimed to have, they would have seen that their comrade was but a puppet dancing on my infernal strings. Still, I must play the part just a while longer. Once this body has served its usefulness, I will return to my masters and let this husk feed the worms. The malevolent being, the infernal within the body of Jaffa, silently squealed in delight. It was too easy to tempt that fool of a man with promises of power and position. Those who believe that they have nothing to lose and everything to gain made for the easiest targets for beings like its kind. As an infernal, it technically had no gender or genitals, but due to its many dealings with the races it had begun to adopt a more broken bar useful form. So often were men willing to bargain away their souls for a quick romp in the hay, and the easiest way to get one of those contracts was to appear as a female. Mind you, this particular infernal, or demon as the races called it, was a rather odd one. It was a member of a very uncommon type of infernal called a hell jester, a type that looked like anything from a court jester from one of the races to an obese clown with more twisted features. They were so rare that out of all infernals there was a less than 1 in 10 million chance that anyone would encounter one. That was not to say that they were not powerful. Not in the least. I wonder how my cousin who took up a permanent residence beneath the town of Derry is doing? Last I heard from them, they were having trouble with a bunch of sniveling brats. Well, even if they somehow managed to destroy their physical body, it is nigh impossible to kill our spiritual one. A specific ritual is needed, and I highly doubt they have what it takes to pull it off. As the entity in command of Jaffa's body was lost in thought, the host body was shaken. What? The hell jester asked with tangible annoyance. We have decided that the best course of action would be to begin a mass purge of any and all dissidents. Are we correct in the assumption that such an action was what you were suggesting? A sinister smile curled itself across the face of the puppet. Indeed, a swift and brutal response that not only targets the rebels, but their families and friends will result in the best outcome for the right side. Their suffering will force their fellows to agree that they have to side with the correct and most divinely blessed side. The streets will run red with the blood of the guilty and innocent alike, and from this pain and death will emerge people who know who their true enemy is and will flock to the kingly banner of the truly noble. The hell jester mentally patted itself on the back. It was so much fun to lead these beings around with doublespeak and deception. If they had any kind of intellect, they might have spotted that it made no mention of the kingly banner being that of the Trelawney kingdom, nor did it mention that the right side was not the side that the rest of the council supported. I love it when a plan comes together, the hell jester proclaimed inside its head as the servants of the false king began to inadvertently further fertilize the seeds of their own downfall. I was right to enlist the aid of a few others. This rising never would have happened if I had not forced this puppet to allow other infernals to possess the bodies of local leaders in so many places. That was a decade well spent. The hell jester's puppet stroked the crystal at the top of its staff. So many souls roiled in agony within, so many of them taken by a puppet that was losing its usefulness. Now, comrades of my masters, let us see if you can take advantage of our assistance to put on a good show, if you would. A broken bar. The advance through the Trelawney kingdom was beyond smooth. After splitting the 160,000-strong invasion force into 16 smaller armies, Red Mountain had the ability to outmaneuver the much larger force sent to deal with them. Much to everyone's surprise, the whole of the nation seemed to be in open revolt against the king and his government. What made things even more bizarre was that these people had torn down the idols dedicated to the god of humans and in their place had put up ones dedicated to Vaile. Those who had seen Vaile firsthand remarked at how lifelike the idols looked. They looked like someone had taken Vaile himself, multiplied him, taken the copies and either shrunk or enlarged them and then proceeded to turn them into metal, stone or wood. They were so eerily lifelike that Vaile himself said that they were just barely in the uncanny valley, whatever that was. The statues and idols were seemingly painted by a master, and the Red Mountain forces noted that the eyes of the idols and sculptures seemed to follow them. As the Red Mountain forces continued their march after stopping to gather supplies from the bizarrely helpful former genocidal maniacs of a native population, the signs that something was amiss only grew in intensity. Nora tapped Vaile on his shoulder as they rode along the road, their forces following them closely. "Have we passed that statue before?" she said, pointing at a statue that was far too similar to the one they had passed merely an hour ago. "Let me check," Vaile said as he spurred his horse over to the eerie idol. A few moments later, Vaile returned. "Yeah, it's the same one. But we aren't going in circles. We passed through 3 different towns and yet we passed the same statue at least 16 times already." "How do you know?" "Because," Vaile stated, "I carved a mark into it every time I saw it." "So, either someone had been moving the statue ahead of us, the statue teleports, or we have a grieving seraph on our hands." "Don't know which it is, but it doesn't seem hostile. It just wants to watch, I guess." "Well, if you aren't concerned about it, then I shouldn't be either." Nora and Vaile continued their march for a time before seeing smoke rising just behind a hill. There was supposed to be a town on the other side of the hill, right?" "Yeah," Vaile remarked. "And where there is smoke a broken bar. There is fire a broken bar." Nora signaled to the rest of the forces with her and they began to assemble into a more combat-ready state. "I knew things were too easy a broken bar," Nora and Vaile said simultaneously as they and their forces crested the hill and saw a town engulfed in flame and slaughter. The town that lay before the forces of Red Mountain was ablaze. In the streets, militia fought desperately in a futile attempt to hold off the knights that had come to bring justice to the rebels and their associates. Nora looked down from the hill and issued commands to the troops with her. The orders were simple and straightforward: advance and destroy or rout the knights, save as many civilians as possible and, after those objectives had been completed, attempt to put out the fires. Each formation advanced on its own, the individual groups having their own command structure and being not only allowed but encouraged to take initiative and cooperate with each other. With the aid of an enchanted earring, each person in the group could communicate with each other non-verbally, add in the hand gestures they could make, and you had a martial force that effectively had built-in medium-range wireless communications for each member and could silently advance on enemy positions to take them by surprise. So, as each group of Red Mountain bandits advanced, they did so silently save for the sounds of their apparel and footsteps. As this town had no walls to defend it, having been wholly reliant on the Trelawney Kingdom's soldiers for defense up until that point, the Red Mountain forces were able to rapidly infiltrate the settlement and begin to do their work. A broken bar. A young woman watched in horror from her hiding place, her arms clutching her 2-month-old child tightly. She had no intention of either supporting or betraying the rebellion up until now, but after seeing the way the knights treated her friends and family, she felt that, if she did manage to escape, she would swear eternal vengeance upon the government. She had watched as her next-door neighbor was savagely beaten, raped and then had her own newborn daughter thrown into the air and impaled on a lance before her very eyes before being disemboweled and strung up by her own intestines. She had cried when her husband was dragged out of their house and beaten to death before the populace. She had run and hid when the knights came after her and her babe with lustful and wrathful eyes. She smelled the smoke and heard the screams. She felt the heat of the flames that were consuming her hometown. Yet she did not make a sound nor move an inch, for if she did she would no doubt be found and brutalized by the knights. What had she done to deserve this fate? All they wanted was freedom to love who they wished, to own property, to worship whatever they wanted and not be forced to subsist on near-starvation rations each winter. Was all of that really so terrible that it was worthy of such damning punishment? "Oh, look what I found!" A voice accompanied a gauntlet-covered hand grabbing her hair and yanking her from her hiding spot. She almost screamed and held her child tighter. Even if she was to die, she would not let her son come to harm. "Come on, fight back. Make it interesting before we get bored and gut you like a fish." The pain of a metal boot impacting her back made her wince, but she would not give them the satisfaction they desired. "Monsters, devils, stay away from Anna." "What the fuck?" The familiar voice of Rupert Smithson accompanied the sound of a blacksmith's hammer impacting the helm of one of the knights. "Run. Don't worry about me. Save yourself and that boy." Anna did not need another moment. She got up despite the pain and ran towards the edge of town. As she fled, she saw the militia being cut down by the far more seasoned low nobility of the cruel kingdom she was a part of. So many brave men, all dying due to the base and cruel monsters sent to teach them a lesson. Then, she heard the growing sound of galloping hooves from behind her. She looked over her shoulder and nearly fainted in terror as she saw a fully armored knight on horseback barreling down on her. The horseman grew closer and closer, his lance leveled and aimed squarely at her back. If it hit her, it would tear though not only her body but also that of her child. Just before the lance could meet her flesh, she tripped on a rock and fell forward. She twisted her body just enough to avoid harming her little one, but the lance still tore up her clothes. She could almost hear the clicking of the knight's tongue as they passed by her. How could anyone be so monstrous? The knight stopped his horse, dismounted and planted his lance into the ground before drawing his sword. The armored man rushed at her and swung down. She closed her eyes and waited for the end. But it never came. Instead there resounded the metallic ringing of a blade blocking another blade. Wow! Subhuman trash. You came here to die? Anna opened her eyes and saw a non-human that looked like a man with wild dog parts. Actually, mate, I came here yesterday. Was just using a little trick to keep myself hidden. The Rian retorted jokingly and in a heavy foreign accent as he pushed the knight back and twisted a ring on his finger, causing an illusion to overtake his form. See, just like a human. Can't do a thing about me accent though. The Rian that had saved her life now looked just like the wandering minstrel that had arrived just the previous day. But weren't there other minstrels that arrived with him? The Rian charged the knight and began singing as he did battle. Traveling on a fried-out donkey on a hermit's trail, head full of zombie, I met a strange lady. She made me nervous. She took me in and gave me breakfast. Another non-human, a dwarf, crashed through a flaming, collapsing building, tossing a knight out in front of them. He too began to sing in the same thick and foreign accent. And she said, do you come from a land down under, where women glow and men plunder? Can't you hear the thunder? You better run, you better take cover. The battle bards fought bravely, but the knights that were being held back by the two were soon joined by others from their kill squad, putting the two warrior bards on the back foot. It was looking hopeless, a broken bar. Then, one of the knights fell over. A crossbow bolt was sticking out from the eye slit and had been lodged deep in his brain. The knights and two warrior bards saw this, and while the knights immediately raised their shields, the Rian merely let out a shout of "Cricky, that was a damn good shot." Missed my ear by next to nothing. Who did that? Anna. The knights and battle bards turned toward the direction the shot came from and all collectively dropped their jaws. The banners and markings on the forces that had snuck up on them were all the same. A black background with a red triangle in the center and a yellow sun and moon on either side. The state propaganda had fixed that symbol into everyone's mind, with the possible but incredibly unlikely exception of the two non-human combat musicians. Red Mountain had come to reap a bloody harvest, and no one would be spared from their brutality. Or so everyone likely thought. The Rian and the dwarf took positions near Anna as she curled up as tight as could be without harming her young child. Never thought I would end my musical career alongside a dwarf, the Rian remarked in his thick Australian-like accent as he hefted his war lute, a lute made of heavy and durable materials that was just as useful as a musical instrument as a bludgeoning implement, into the ready position. Well, how about a friend? The dwarf jokingly retorted in the same thick accent as the Rian as he held his hunting horn, ready to blow and slash or swing if the need arose. The Rian looked down at the dwarf and smiled. I suppose that works too. The two got ready for the inevitable clash that would happen after the Red Mountain bandits destroyed the 11 knights remaining alive in the road, the one who had suffered a lethal headshot still lying on the dirt warmed by the burning town. As the Red Mountain bandits advanced, they quickly dispatched the Trelawney knights. During the short battle, the knights were outraged that they were getting ganged up on by roughly 10 bandits apiece. Shouts of, "Have you no honor? And how can you not respect the practice of honorable one-on-one duels? This noble knight demands you all wait your turn to die," made up the bulk of the hypocritical nonsense that was spouted by the sadistic monsters that made up the armored shock troops of the Trelawney kingdom. Such words were often mostly just ignored, but occasionally were responded to with joking remarks such as, well, the pot is calling the kettle black. Or I could ask you the same, Mr. Fancy Pants. Where was your so-called knightly honor a few moments ago, eh? Needless to say, in a match between one heavily armored knight and at least 10 bandits who were more than ready to sink to any low needed to win, the victor should be obvious. There may have been 11 knights, but the Red Mountain bandits outnumbered them at least 10 to 1. This was to say nothing of the Red Mountain forces operating in other parts of the town, dealing with the knights in those places. However, there was not a moment to rest even after the knights were slain. Hey, you lot. One of the bandits addressed the 3, arguably 4, people before his group. It isn't safe in here. Take the road out of town behind us and you will reach shelter. That is, unless you either want to follow these clowns to an early grave by doing something stupid or you want to help us deal with these knights and the fire. I really wouldn't recommend staying put, though. A night may come by after we move on or the smoke and heat might get to you. The bandits then split into two groups and flanked around the three stunned people and the little baby before reforming behind them and moving onwards deeper into the city. The Rian and the dwarf were still in their battle stance, but eventually realized they were not in harm's way anymore, at least not from anything humanoid. Well, that happened at a broken bar, the dwarf said in his heavy Australian-like accent. Yeah, hey, maybe we should take their advice. I personally wouldn't want to be stuck out in this heat unless I was cooking something on the barbie, and well done Rian steak is something I would rather not be on a vulture's menu. The Rian helped Anna to her feet and the three ran out of the town together. Well, maybe not all non-humans are barred a broken bar, Anna thought to herself as they escaped the flaming hell that was her birthplace. A broken bar. A group of 30 knights were surrounded in the town square. When the Red Mountain bandits came to add their chaotic anarchy to the party, everyone assumed it would become a three-way battle for survival and victory. Much to the surprise of the surviving militia and the knights, the Red Mountain bandits had sided with the militia and turned the tide irrevocably in their favor. It wasn't strange that the addition of a few hundred well-trained and well-equipped bandits could turn the tide so heavily against the knights. No, not in the slightest bit strange at all. This was beyond outrageous. They came here to bring justice to the wicked and have fun while doing it. They even set the town ablaze to prove their point. But now the settlement was having its flames doused by mages. Mages. The knights could not believe that there were mages willing to do work for such a monstrous and evil crime syndicate. And that there were humans among the bandits was even more shocking. Can't you people see? We humans should be working together to destroy the non-humans, not aid them. Humanity is the master race. It says so in the Holy Testament. One of the knights, their leader, tried to reason with the mob surrounding him and his knights, but it was met with mocking laughter. Have you read the Holy Testament yourself? The words from one of the bandits called him out. No, of course not. Only the priests are allowed to read it. Then how do you know they are telling the truth? The knight leader momentarily faltered. It was a valid point. Since only the priesthood were allowed to read the Holy Testament, then they could say anything they liked. They were human, after all, and a broken bar. Wait a minute. I see what you are doing, race traitor. Trying to get me to denounce the one faith, let alone attempting to make me question it, is a crime punishable by death. More mocking laughter came from the bandits. And what isn't punishable by death here? All you have to do is make shit up and it's off with your head. Seriously, this is why I left Trelawney in the first place. He a broken bar. He had left the kingdom of God. So, you are not just a race traitor but also a defector from the nation chosen by the one God? You should die 1,000 deaths for your heresy. Before either he or his comrades could act, sense of disgust and morbid sickness washed over them as though something so grotesque that its very existence corrupted reality had entered the area. You are using the wrong word. A voice that seemed to be the combined result of innumerable inhuman sounds came from the mob, which parted and revealed a humanoid monstrosity clad in white robes and a mask. Every inch of its body was covered, so that not even the slightest bit of skin or the smallest hair could be seen. Even the holes where its eyes peered out from behind the mask were covered in a glass-like lens that obscured the sight of what were surely absurdly grotesque peepers. The word you should use to describe the lack of belief is apostasy. Heresy is the worshipping of the same god or gods, but in a different and forbidden way. Apostasy is the worshipping of different gods or the general abandonment of a once held faith. Likewise, you cannot use either to describe someone who left your nation for another. The term used would be a expatriate, as in that person is a Trelawney Kingdom expatriate. Please, shut up. The knights nearly shouted as one. Don't talk. Be silent and keep your hideous form away from us. The white-robed figure shrugged and sighed and withdrew a folding chair from some kind of unseen magic bag. Unfolding it and placing it on the ground, the figure sat and held up one of its hands with all four its fingers and its thumb all outstretched. 5. It folded one of its fingers. 4. What was it counting? 3. What was it counting down to? 2. Was it going to remove its robe and mask and devour them all like the monstrosity it was? 1. Dear God, give us strength to impact. At the precise moment the robed figure said that final word, some kind of humanoid creature smashed into the ground before the knights. Dust and debris flew everywhere, and the ground trembled at the force of the landing. The new being rose to its feet and stared daggers at the 30 knights. At its side were 2 hand axes and 2 one-handed folding repeating crossbows. You do know that kind of landing is terrible for your legs and especially your knees, Nora. Nora? Where had the knight leader heard that name before? The woman brushed her hair out of her face and sneered at the knights. The new tyrant of Red Mountain has arrived. It was at that precise moment when the knights truly realized that they were royally fucked. Even with their armor on, Nora, the new tyrant of Red Mountain, was a good 7 or 8 inches taller than the tallest of the knights. Clad in the same outfits worn to her ancestors' funeral, although it was currently missing the mourning veil, Nora towered over the armored psychopaths in front of her with fury in her eyes. The tyrant stared down the knights for what seemed to be minutes until someone broke the standoff. As if a spell had broken, one of the knights tried to rush her with a swing of his long sword, only to have her catch it mid-swing and snap it like an icicle. Pathetic. Nora growled as she looked on with contempt at the stunned knight. Your steel is weak and brittle. But that is what happens when you not only ignore the knowledge of the other races, but also actively work counter to it. The dwarves mastered the art of metalworking and taught it to any who would attempt it. The complete lack of respect you have for the knowledge and hard work of others shows in your equipment and construction. You bitch. You dare say that we, the superior, master race, have inferior technique to those stunted bastards? Nora scoffed at this remark. Yes, I do. And your martial prowess leaves much to be desired as well. Without Rian in your nation outside of mere property, who will teach the art of combat, who will teach martial techniques? I'm guessing that you had some masters back in the day, but they and their schools died out, leaving only the memory of them and nothing else. I've seen your attempts at using martial arts and martial skills, and they are laughable. It's like watching a child scream out skill names it has heard while swinging its toy sword without understanding what the words mean or how to execute said art or skill. You are all absolutely fucking adorable in that regard. After mocking the knights, and by proxy the whole Trelawney kingdom, she gave the knight with the shattered sword a boot to the chest and sent him flying towards the mob that had encircled them. Tear him to shreds. Nora made a motion of running her finger across her throat and laughed as the mob dragged the unconscious knight away and poked him repeatedly, painfully and thoroughly with many pointy implements of death and destruction, including but not limited to pitchforks, knives, swords, fire pokers and spears. Damn whore. Gut her like a fish. Make her end as painful and drawn out as possible. The leader of the remaining 28 knights, not including himself, shouted out his orders and the group attempted to surround Nora. 8 Z escapist reversed spiral spray. Nora spun upside down as she backflipped out of the encirclement, firing her crossbows wildly as she twirled. Several knights were hit by the bolts, and despite the bolts being smaller and lighter than the ones fired by two-handed crossbows, the usage of a skill made them hit nearly as hard. Some of the knights were wounded by the attack, while others were morbidly thankful that they were protected by the bodies of their comrades. Spin strike. The knight closest to Nora shouted as he tried to emulate the move wielded by an elf swordsman in a green tunic he had slain. All the courage in the world couldn't save that brat from his end. And now that this knight knew his secret technique, he could easily take down. Nora stopped his spin with a roundhouse kick to his face and mocked his attempt. Like I said, children playing pretend with toy swords. None of you actually know any skills, do you? Let me show you all how it's only a broken bar. Nora holstered her crossbows and drew her twin hand axes. 8 Z spin strike. Nora spun once and a blue and white wave of energy flowed outwards from her hand axes, forming a quickly expanding ring of death around her. The ring cut through the armor of the closest knights like a hot knife through butter. Worse still, their armor immediately above and below the cut shattered like glass, proving just how little their smiths knew about making decent steel armor. Nora saw the fragmenting metal and couldn't hold back her laughter. That is beyond hilarious. How the hell does someone make steel that brittle? Is it even steel at that point? If it weren't for your nation's obscenely absurd levels of blatantly evil acts, I would wonder if you people were clowns. Hell, maybe you are just evil clowns. What, was armor made of pottery too cheap, so you settled for a metal equivalent? Even as the 5 knights that had been cut down by Nora's skill breathed their last, their comrades stepped over their bodies and tried to take on the new tyrant. 8 tildes twin disarming strike. 8 tilde. Nora brought down her hand axes onto the shoulders of one of the knights, thoroughly disarming him. His upper limbs fell to the ground and he screamed as he looked down at his bleeding stumps. Don't worry, Nora joked as she continued her assault on the now armless combatant and lopped off both of his legs at their attaching point. You've just been disarmed and defeated. Nothing to be concerned about there, although now you need assistance as your competition has a leg up on you. So, let me give you a hand. She then gave the limbless wanderer a backhand strike as if to complete the mockery of the now dead knight. She then turned and grabbed the short sword at the waist of another knight after tossing one of her hand axes into the air. With a swift motion she drew it from his waist and slashed open the throat of another knight. Good fight. We'll call it a draw. Now, a tilde's blade throw. 8 tilde. She joked as she used another skill, throwing the short sword like an anime ninja would throw a kunai at another knight and impaling his head through his visor. She caught her falling hand axe and yelled at the knight with a short sword in his head. Catch. Oops, too late. A few more swings of her hand axes and shots from her crossbows later and there was but one knight left, the leader of the now dead bunch. Nora stared down the knight captain. He had been smart, or at least thought he had been smart. Whatever is the matter, tyrant bitch? Did my men wear you out? Oh, don't worry, I'll give you the option to be my fuck toy for a while. Submit to me and I swear that I will let your men go. After I have 90% of them killed in front of you, of course. Really? You should consider this a favor. I know you are. Nora walked up to him while he was monologuing and gave him a heavy kick to his unmentionables with her metal-tipped boot. You talk to me, a broken bar, Nora muttered as she proceeded to make a certain anime boxer proud, and Dempsey rolled the knight captain's ass into near unconsciousness. Unfortunately, there were no jet engine sounds to accompany the beatdown, but the metallic crinkling of the knight captain's helmet being dented by the mailed fists of the tyrant and the whooshing of the air her fists made as they flew towards their target made for good sound effects. Nonetheless, pulling back a bit, the knight captain barely held to his senses. He tried to raise a finger as if to say, wait just a damn moment, but Nora wasn't having it. She rushed back in and gave the knight captain a powerful uppercut to the jaw which lifted his body a good 3 feet off the ground. Then she really got into it. A furious flurry of blows kept the now nearly dead knight captain in the air for a good minute and a half, or as Vaile would have put it, she gave his cadaver 7 full panel pages worth of punches. By the time Nora gave the final blow that sent the dead man's body ragdolling through the air and into the burned-out husk of the town elder's house, not a single major bone in the knight captain's corpse wasn't thoroughly shattered like logs in an industrial press. Nora straightened up and spat on the body of one of the knights at her feet. Giving the body a good, hard kick to the gut to make sure it wasn't faking it revealed that the corpse was, in fact, just pining for the fjords. She grabbed the groaning man and tossed his sorry ass to one of her lieutenants as she marveled at the weakness of the Trelawney knights. Fucking lightweights, a broken bar, she mumbled as one last display of contempt before walking back to the main camp. She would have words with the poor bastard who tried to pass himself off as a corpse. What did he expect them to do? Did he honestly not expect them to strip him down to his skivvies and burn his body? Well, I guess they are just that dumb. Centuries of inbreeding does tend to do that, now doesn't it? The interrogation of the sole surviving Trelawney knight was, to put it mildly, both incredibly anticlimactic and almost entirely useless. The only remotely actionable intel the Red Mountain bandits got from him before he expired were the locations of several other groups of knights and the knowledge that the Trelawney kingdom had gone into full despotic martial law mode due to their invasion/revolution. Aside from that, they only gained knowledge that was heavily coated in a thick and rancid layer of racism, propaganda and general human supremacist insanity. They still had no idea how the revolution that they were witnessing came about, why it came about and who was behind it, but for now they at least had targets. The Knights could be dealt with by the other groups that had split off from the massive invasion force they had entered with, but the army with Nora and Vaile had a more interesting target to take care of. Yes, they were going to take the head off the serpent. They were aiming for the capital of the kingdom. The march to the capital would be indirect, mostly so as not to arouse concern and to not allow the Trelawney kingdom to consolidate their troops for a siege or decisive engagement. Despite the numbers of both forces being roughly the same, neither Nora nor Vaile wanted to risk everything on a single battle that might very well see the whole operation undone by bad luck. If they managed to take the capital, only to be trapped inside when the rest of the Trelawney kingdom's military arrived, it wouldn't matter if they killed the king. They would still be forced to fight a costly battle. In Nora's case, she did not want to lose lives taking the city, which certainly would be well defended anyways, only to lose even more holding it. Vaile had seen the result of such actions in dozens of games, let alone history documentaries and movies, so he knew that taking a city in a Pyrrhic victory only to have to defend it immediately afterwards was a good way to get your army completely destroyed and your campaign swiftly ended. Those who did not learn from others were doomed to repeat their mistakes, after all, and both Nora and Vaile did not want to die in such a pointlessly costly and likely fatal engagement. So, the warband packed its baggage and moved on, its rambling and meandering path causing any who followed to question any and all movements made by the army. Was a right turn towards a lord's manor a sign of an attack, or was it to feint? Was the turning away from a settlement an act of mercy, or was that settlement still in their crosshairs? The erratic movements of the army and its seemingly random bouts of either heightened or lethargic speed made them a target that its pursuers could neither catch nor form tactics against. After all, how can you form tactics around the utterly unpredictable? A broken bar. It was almost time. He had received the command from both his king and his true master and was gathering his family together. He gave them one final hug and sent them off in a carriage along with most of his wealth. Having liquidated most of his assets to give them this boost, it was almost time for him to fulfill his duty to his true master, the tyrant of Red Mountain. When he had heard that the tyrant had died, he nearly lost hope. When he found out that not only had the true heir to the tyrant's legacy assumed the mantle of leadership, but that Vaile Almighty had descended upon the mortal plane and was working alongside the new tyrant, his heart nearly skipped a beat too many. Truly, now was the time for him to fulfill the duty his family had been preparing themselves to enact for so very long. He was Duke Melvin Tucko Packard, the latest in a long line of pawns in the tyrant's say-long game. He was prepared to face the consequences of the actions he was about to take, but he had also made sure that his wife and children would not suffer the fallout of his work. He was the hidden blade pointed at the wrongful king of Trelawney's throat, and at the time he would fulfill his family's mission was fast approaching. He did not need a carriage to take him to the capital. He could get there faster with a decent horse. He did not need to bring luggage, as his home away from home in the capital had everything he would need. As he arrived in the capital, he knew for sure that things were as grim for this kingdom as they could be, or at least for the current regime it was. He could see the markings left over from bloody crackdowns on any A dissenters and A rebels, and he could still see and smell the brutalized corpses of the non-humans that had been mercilessly and publicly tortured to death for colluding with the enemy. Whether any of those accusations were true or not was irrelevant. All that mattered to these people were the message and the spectacle. Melvin walked into the palace and bowed to the king. Despite hating the ever-loving shit out of everyone in the capital, let alone the palace, he would have to put on a mask and hide his intent. You're here. Gertrude for war. As usual, the inbred genetic nightmare of a king was barely understandable through his numerous deformities. Yes, my liege. Ah, before you do, Jaffa interrupted. Would you please follow me to my chambers, Duke Packard? I have something to discuss with you. Your ears only, of course. Melvin was now very nervous. Jaffa was one of the worst people he could have to deal with. His talent for uncovering plots and schemes was unnatural. Did Jaffa know that he was preparing to take the life of the king? Still, He had to play it cool. Any wrong moves and it was the end of the line. Of course, my good sir. Anything for a fellow servant of the kingdom. Then follow me, if you please. We have much to discuss. The moment where he would make it or break it was fast approaching. Melvin racked his brain and wondered if he could escape whatever trap had been set for him. If push came to shove, he could always try and silence the man with a blade to the heart, though doing so would blow his cover for sure. Things were not looking good for the hidden blade, at least not in his own eyes, but whether or not he was right to be worried would soon become apparent. "Step into my parlor, a broken bar," Jaffa said through his predator's smile as he gestured for Melvin to enter ahead of him. Melvin entered Jaffa's private quarters half expecting to be knocked out or see interrogators. Instead he saw a rather unremarkable room, save for the odd trinkets and baubles that were scattered about the place. With either reckless abandon or precise positioning, Melvin honestly couldn't tell which it was. His hair on the back of his neck stood on end as he heard the door close shut behind him and the many locks on it being sealed one by one. He turned around only to see Jaffa smiling like a madman, his eyes having lost all color save for black. From one servant to another, "I bid thee good day," Jaffa said in an oddly feminine and cheerful voice that seemed incongruous to his form. The head advisor bowed deeply like he was putting on a play as the starring actor. Please forgive the rather rough costume I am wearing. Unfortunately, they don't make outfits like they used to. To remember the days long since past when the races were far more powerful and far more durable. Striking a bargain then felt far more a broken bar rewarding for a player of the stage like myself. Melvin backed off and drew his sword. "I know not what games you are playing, Chief Advisor, but I will not be made a fool of by this lunacy. If you cornered me here just to pretend to be someone else, then Jaffa seemed startled, but then a smile too large to be on his face scrawled across it. Mine good sir. Where best mine manners. Prithee, wait a moment lest I change Geeth into something far more a broken bar comfortable." Jaffa's body slumped to the floor like a puppet whose strings had been cut. A spectral form of a twisted feminine jester wearing a smiling mask rose from Jaffa's limp corpse and once it reached its full height it took a deep bow. "I am known across Abyss as one of the Hell Jesters. Please, as I have taken the form you see before you, refer to my existence as a Hell Jester variant. A Hellekin, if you will." Melvin now took a fully battle-ready stance. "I will not permit a demon like you to interfere with my work." The Hellekin gestured like a true stage performer as if to deny any hostility. No, my good sir. Why ever would I want that nuisance of a king left alive? No, indeed. I am here to help you, whether you want it or not. My master and yours have history that goes quite far back, although your current master does not have as immediate a connection with mine as the old tyrant did. Neither sheathing his sword nor dispelling the magic dancing at his fingertips, Melvin stood his ground. "And I suppose you intend to use my body as your next puppet?" "Never, perish the thought," the Hellekin said. "This fool's cold cadaver still has its uses. So, if you do not mind a broken bar." The Hellekin possessed Jaffa's corpse and it slowly rose to its feet. The Hellekin possessed Jaffa smiled a wide, Cheshire grin and tossed a small idol to Melvin who refused to catch it out of paranoia. The idol landed on the ground and as Melvin looked at it his heart sank. It was a small effigy of Lord Vaile. He had let his distrust of a demon blind him to broken bar weight. Demons were not supposed to be able to touch an idol of the divine, even when possessing someone. How hard a broken bar? The possessed corpse walked over, picked up the idol and rubbed it against its face. "Don't think for a moment, good sir, that my kind cannot worship and adore the one true God like you and yours can. Strange, isn't it? For we malicious and twisted beings to be worshipping such a compassionate, merciful and upstanding fellow. I mean." The puppet walked over to Melvin and put the idol up to his mouth. "You let him fall. Now, kiss and make up. Earn his forgiveness for your inexcusable transgression. Beg him for his love to be bestowed upon you. Also help me Vaile, I will fucking end you." The Hellekin, having gone from calm and collected to stark raving mad in mere moments, certainly shook Melvin, but he sheathed his sword, dispelled his magic and took the idol in both hands before kissing it. "Let us hope you have earned his forgiveness." The corpse puppet sighed. "Although, if you have not, fulfilling your life's purpose by plunging your cold metal blade into that buffoon's heart or throat or kidneys or liver may very well be enough to get you back in his good graces. The puppeteered corpse unlocked all the locks on the door and opened it before turning back. Good luck. We're all rooting for you. So, go out there and break a leg or spine, or anything that belongs to the fleshy, mortal body of the dung heap. Mulvin was left standing in Jaffa's room while holding an idol from what the kingdom would call a pagan faith. He quickly stashed the idol in a cabinet, left the room and went back to the throne room, arriving just in time to see Jaffa regale the court with his assurances that Mulvin was a true patriot and servant of the one true God. Mulvin noticed that the words chosen by Jaffa were always true, but also not at all informative. The puppeteered Jaffa never used clear phrasing, never spoke about anything other than ridiculously vague details and never directly mentioned who the one true God was. This demon was skirting around every potential landmine with the absolute minimum amount of clearance. Mulvin stared in wonder as he realized that if this was how a demon spoke, then they would make the absolute best politicians. Nothing this Helican said was untrue. Everything it said was absolutely 100% factual and undeniably correct, but it used every word and phrase it needed to obscure its true intention and design behind innumerable layers of doublespeak and hidden meaning. A fellow duke approached Mulvin and put a hand on his shoulder. Mulvin looked and saw that the other duke had a red mountain signet ring, just like him. It's amazing, isn't it? How it can say nothing but the truth but also at the same time say nothing but lies. Mulvin smiled uncomfortably at his comrade in arms. Well, it's all the better for it to exploit loopholes and intentionally vague and misleading wording. I don't trust it, not even as far as I could throw it. But it does seem to be faithful to the almighty broken bar. The other duke laughed. At least it is on our side, am I right? Mulvin smiled. For now, at least, it is. But its kind are duplicitous by nature, are they not? Therefore, we have not the slightest bit of a chance to know if or when it will turn on us. The other duke patted Mulvin's back. Have faith, brother. All 60 of us, you and I included, are ready to let our blades taste the blood of the wicked. The Almighty is with us, and He will protect us and allow us to do His good work. I trust you are ready to kill the enemy of our master? Mulvin nodded as he watched the puppet of a man spin doctor its way into making the king set himself up for assassination. Always, brother, always. For a better tomorrow for all? Aye. For a better tomorrow for all. All save for people like them, of course. The two conspirators watched the court from a safe distance, knowing full well that it was unlikely that they or their fellows would emerge from their endeavor unscathed, let alone alive. Still, the dominoes had started to fall, and time was running out. In a few days, it would be the 15th of March, and on that day they would spring their trap. All they could hope for was that everything would go perfectly, and that the date would forevermore be remembered as the day a tyrant died so that the tyrant could ascend to the throne. Nora went over the battle map in a large tent. Thankfully it was enchanted, and while not as potent as a heavier and immobile version, it still let Nora and her generals see the movements of the Red Mountain armies as well as the reported movements of the Trelawney military. The map was far from perfect and did not truly account for terrain and weather, but it was certainly a fair bit better than just having an unenchanted map to look at. So, the army under Rabun Hud is doing its job. Based on our intel, the Trelawney Kingdom's main army has been following him and his forces for a good 70 days. Not that they will ever catch him, of course. You can't expect an army of roughly 170,000 to catch an army of only about 9,000 unless some specific conditions are met. Nora looked over the markers and numbers that were changing in, mostly, real time. She could see that she had put her faith in the right man. Rabun Hud was leading the bulk of the Trelawney military, roughly 80% of its total military might, on a wild goose chase, crossing rivers and streams, moving through forests and dense woodlands, and even going so far as to occasionally be just barely out of reach by nightfall, only to be several tens of miles away come the morning. The winding chase was slowly leading the Trelawney soldiers and knights further and further away and, more importantly, into a trap. The idea was to guide the Trelawney military into a deep ravine, blocked them off from going forwards or backwards, and then rained death and destruction down upon them. The ravine would be wide enough for them to send in about 40 to 50,000 troops, and even more if they decided to bunch them all way too close before they realized that they were blocked and the trap had to be sprung. Ideally, the Red Mountain forces left behind would attack the Trelawney forces outside of the ravine and prevent them from interfering, while the forces under Aben had used the high sides of the ravine to deliver a potent and lethal surprise to the fools below him. This was the ideal scenario, but the best laid plans of mice and men often go awry, so extra insurance was needed. Thus, Nora authorized use of a special weapon Savelt had kept locked away. A little broken bar gift that could be given to the enemy. A sticky, smelly, itchy gift that, if set alight, would burn for hours and run into every crack and crevice in the armor of those who had the misfortune of having the substance applied to them. Worse yet, if the flaming goo didn't kill them, they would suffer terrible side effects anyways. The mixture, stolen from a hero god that came to the world a long time ago, was known by its creator as a green napalm, a fusion of the incendiary mixture the hero god called a napalm and the oily extract from dozens of rash-producing plants. When lit alight, green napalm would not only burn someone, but would turn the rash-inducing oils into an airborne nightmare that, if inhaled, caused horrific pain and agony, to say nothing of what it would do to the wounds caused by the napalm itself and those from arrows, sling stones and other tools that would come during the ambush. Where one was already bad enough, the hero god had doubled down and created something even more horrific. And now Nora was breaking open the never, ever use this vault simply to destroy a force that she did not want to deal with normally. 80 long days and 80 long nights. That was how long they had chased these damn bandits. They had been led over narrow bridges, through dense woodlands, and they had been so very close to fighting them so many times, only not be denied at the last moment. Everyone in the army was tired, miserable and hungry. Supply lines had been stretched nearly to the breaking point, and they still had ground to cover. But at last there was light at the end of the tunnel. The Red Mountain bastards had entered into a deep ravine, one that was notorious for being near impossible to exit the way they wanted to. There was really only one way in and one way out, although you could exit the other side with great effort. Scouts had made a detailed report that the entire roughly 5,000 brigands had entered the ravine, and now the Trelawney kingdom was camped right outside of it. He could almost smell the brown trousers of the brigands and bandits now that they realized they were trapped. Tomorrow he would join the group of 65,000 sent into the ravine to end this farce. Maybe he would be the one to slay the tyrant himself. Night fell, and for the first time in what felt like forever, John Shoemaker had a good night's rest. His belly was full of food for the first time in 3 weeks. And the breakfast the next day was going to be enough to fill him to the bursting if he had heard right. He couldn't wait to run his state-issued spear through the gut of an evil bandit. He would come home a hero and tell his wife and children the story of how he had helped save the world. A broken bar. Morning came, and the Trelawney kingdom tried to stuff 65,000 men into the ravine. As they marched, none of them noticed how odd it was that the bandits had not set up traps or ambushes to try and delay the inevitable. They only realized that things were bad when the sounds of fighting came from behind them, but by then it was too late to turn back. The entryway behind them erupted with a thunderous noise and was sealed shut by debris. John Shoemaker felt himself being pushed forwards and into the men in front of him, but they could not move at all. The sea of humanity was then pelted with fragile ceramic pots filled with some kind of irritating jelly that stank and stung to high heavens. With no ranged troops with them, all John and his compatriots could do is try and lift their metal-rimmed wooden shields to try and stave off the incoming archer and slinger fire. Unfortunately, there was so little room to move that barely anyone could raise their shields at all. This fact made it so that no one was truly safe from the stones and arrows and bolts raining down upon them, let alone the ceramic jars and jugs. Then, as if the crucible they were in was not bad enough, a few dozen fire arrows began to rain down, followed by lit torches. As if the fires of hell were lit in the pit they were in, Flames of unnatural heat and intensity erupted amongst the soldiers. The gel that stung his eyes and skin and orifices burst into flame, and the pain he felt was amplified to an unspeakable degree. John screamed as hard as he could. He flailed wildly as he attempted to extinguish the liquid fires that seemed in through his clothes and studded leather armor and scorched his flesh. However, no matter where he tried to run, there were more people in the same situation. The pots kept coming, as did the arrows, bolts and sling stones. John panicked and tried to push everyone out of his way, but he was not alone in this action. The mass of people churned and crushed their own. All the while projectiles rained down from on high. John was struck in the neck with a sling stone and suddenly lost all motor functions. His spinal cord had suffered a very unlucky strike and had rendered him a quadriplegic. With no ability to move anything below his neck, John slumped to the ground, even as more bodies followed suit. What made things worse was that he could see his body being buried under those of his comrades. He could smell the foul odor of the liquid flame and feel its heat upon him. He wanted to scratch the skin that was itching so bad, and he broke into tears as the fumes entered his lungs, and the irritation within him made him that much more miserable. More bodies piled up, and the light of the holy sun was blotted out more and more. The pressure applied by the other corpses built up, as did the heat, and soon a broken bar. John Shoemaker was no more. In his place was only a broken and burning body lying beneath a pile of flaming corpses. He, like so many others in this war, never got a chance for glory, let alone victory. At least he never got to see the once massive force of Trelawney soldiers and knights outside of the ravine be reduced to less than 35% of their previous number and rooted off the field in disgrace. At least he never lived to see the downfall of the regime he swore his life to and the rising of a former bandit as the new ruler. At least he never got to find out that his wife had already remarried, and to a midget-blooded subhuman dwarf with a heavy foreign accent, no less. It is as they say, sometimes, ignorance truly is bliss. Nora almost immediately got confirmation that the plan had gone off without a hitch. In fact, it had been far more successful than she had ever anticipated it would be. Nearly 80% of the Trelawney Kingdom's military might had been wiped out in a single attack, and all due to a mix of careful planning, foolish enemies and terrible weaponry. Still, if the reports were anything to be believed, then the green napalm was far too malicious to be used in anything but the direst of situations. She could not use it lightly, lest the moniker of a tyrant bestowed upon her and saved by their detractors and foes be proven undeniably true. All forces remaining are to gather together. It is time to bring down the hammer. We march on Paradiso City. The capital of the Trelawney Kingdom will fall. After giving that order, Nora looked over at Vaile, who was standing in a corner, away from the rest of the gathering of military minds. She had a feeling that if she tried to force Vaile to attack the city with her armies, he would simply get up and flee the field, but she also had a feeling that he would try and help in his own way. "Hey, lover boy." Nora heard a few whispers as one of the military leaders called out to Vaile in a demeaning way. Vaile either did not hear or did not care to answer, which made the man who talked down to him angry. "Oi, I'm talking to you, boy." The military man got up in Vaile's face, or at least he attempted to, but Vaile was far taller than the dwarf, and said dwarf barely reached Vaile's waist. Vaile looked down and chuckled to himself. "My dick can't speak but my face can. Do I need to get you a ladder so you can stop yelling at my cock? It won't react to you, if that's what you are trying to do. I really don't swing that way." Nora held back a laugh, as did others in the tent. Even though Vaile wasn't a bard, he executed some damn good vicious mockery. "Don't talk to me like that, you damn trickster." The dwarf was irate. "Trickster? What do you mean?" Nora spoke up this time, but Vaile raised a hand to stop her and allowed the dwarf to continue on his rant. "No, number. Don't interrupt. I want to see where he goes with this." The dwarf gave him an angry, if not furious look, and began to rant. "I know you are just a spy for some other nation or race. You hide behind that stupid full-body outfit and even cover your face in a mask that distorts your voice. And seriously, all white clothing with red highlights. What are you trying to pull? Dressing like some kind of messianic saint? I don't know what kind of mindfuckery you've used on everyone, but it won't work on me. I have connections and I can make sure you die slowly and painfully as you curse your foolish intentions to attempt to masquerade as the real Vaile." After the dwarf finished his rant, Vaile leaned down and patted his head. This act alone would have set the dwarf off and made the others in the tent laugh out loud, but Vaile went one step further. There, little one. Here's a sucker, so stop being so mad." Withdrawing a lollipop from his inventory, Vaile tucked it into one of the pockets on the dwarf's clothing. "You little shit." The dwarf raged as he tried to throw punches at Vaile, only to have the player use his hand and max-level strength to keep the flailing dwarf at arm's length. Infuriated at his treatment, the dwarf pulled out a pistol and shot at Vaile's face, hitting his mask and knocking it off. "Damn it," Vaile muttered as the mask hit the ground. "I knew I needed an actual string or something to keep that on a broken bar." The entire camp was now bathed in the full, unbridled force of Vaile's reversed attractiveness. Bandit women orgasmed instantly and fainted due to his stats. Bandit men also followed this pattern, overwhelmed by his pure machismo. Only the strongest and the most powerful could keep themselves upright and conscious. Most of these people were in the tent with him. There was just one exception to all of this, not including Vaile, of course. It was the dwarf, who had begun puking up his guts as he suffered a seizure on the floor. Vaile picked up his mask, dusted it off and put it back on, much to the relief and disappointment of everyone in a several tens of miles radius. The dwarf that started this was unconscious and convulsing on the ground with foam bubbling out of his mouth and his eyes having rolled back into his head. "Did anyone check to see if there was a plant among us?" Vaile asked while gesturing to the obvious spy whose inability to deal with Vaile's nature caused him to reveal himself. Nora struggled to stay upright on her shaky feet and shook her head. Vaile sighed and took some rope from his storage and hogged the dwarf. "Spy. Well, if you don't mind me, I'm going to go for a walk. I'll be back when everyone gets up and cleans themselves off." With that, Vaile teleported back to Red Mountain, leaving a camp filled with a great many unconscious people who had had their minds blown. When he arrived, Vaile opened up his storage and took a ring from within and placed it on his finger. "That is precisely the reaction that I was worried about when I took this off or broken bar," Vaile muttered as he walked to his quarters. Little did he know that he was in for a very unwelcome surprise. Had he just stayed in the camp he might have avoided what was about to happen, but alas, he did not. Vaile opened the door to his quarters and immediately regretted his actions. A tall, lean but muscled creature with matted white fur, gnarled fingers, skeletal head with wild and glowing green eyes, 5 horns made of deep green magicite crystal growing from its skull-like noggin and obvious signs of an unhygienic lifestyle was rolling around in his bed. Vaile instinctively knew who this was, despite her seeming transformation from buxom bombshell to rather disturbing monstrosity, and slowly began to close the door. But it was already too late. The ruler of the Radan had noticed him and had already jumped out of Vaile's bed and was rushing over to him. "Fuck, fuck, 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 fuck," Vaile yelled as he made a mad dash down the hall, much to the confusion of everyone who saw and heard him. At least, there was confusion until they saw a naked and terrifying skull-headed rat woman with 5 horns and flaming green eyes chasing after him. Stay still." The crazy rat lady howled in a twisted voice as she gradually closed the distance. Vaile was running out of options for keeping himself from being dragged back to house arrest in a nation of sadistic monsters, and making sharp turns down the hallways only delayed the inevitable. It was when Cho was only a few meters from grabbing him when he hit on a brilliant idea. Vaile reached a large window and jumped out. It would be a nearly 2,000 foot drop to the ground, but he was already prepared. "No!" Cho screamed as she saw Vaile commit suicide. She nearly jumped out the window herself, but though better of it. There were a lot of people below, people who didn't know about her connection to Savilt, people who would think she was an invader. That moment of hesitation was all Vaile needed. She looked down, expecting to see Vaile's broken body lying in a pool of his own blood and surrounded by mortified onlookers. What she saw instead was a distinct lack of both. There was, however, an open portal just few hundred feet above the oblivious masses below that closed shortly after she laid eyes on it. Reak! She screamed incoherently as she realized Vaile was out of her reach again, and this time it was her own damn fault for not getting to him fast enough. She would find the bastards who used whatever mental manipulation that was used to get him to do this. She would find them and made them wish they hadn't stolen her precious prize from under her nose again for centuries to come. They would know pain that much, she swore to herself. As her fury waned, she realized something that she had nearly forgotten to do when something similar happened before. Something she had, in her rage just now, utterly failed to do. Unlike before, she didn't cast a tracking spell in time. Now furious at not only whomever or whatever stole her prize but at herself as well, she opened a portal and retreated back to her domain to let off some steam with a bit of torture and mass murder. A broken bar. A portal opened up on the ground in Paradiso City and a very tall man in full white robes and a mask launched out of it, flying into the air and sticking a perfect landing on a rooftop. The man looked around and checked some invisible screen and immediately became downcast. As the town guard gathered around the ground floor of the building he was on, he withdrew a staff forged with some of the most powerful and rare objects ever to exist. Well, fuck. Now I may have to actually fight by myself. Damn it. My build isn't geared towards this sheet of broken bar, the man moaned as the town guard approached him after having scaled to the connected roofs themselves. The man jumped off the rooftops and made a mad dash for the nearest town gate, parkering off random objects and walls as he dodged the authorities. That was, until he reached a wide and circular plaza where he beheld something that made him seethe with hatred. The man stopped, turned to face the guards and tapped his staff on the ground. Fucking hella, broken bar. Up till now I hadn't taken this shit seriously. I didn't think this kind of evil could exist in human society. A broken bar. Maybe I was just spoiled by my life before this, but now a broken bar. You people really are irredeemably broken bar, the man said with anger in his voice. For behind him were the heads of dozens of non-human children piled high and lit alight with flame. The man spun his staff and screamed at the guards. All right, you fucking bastards. No more hiding behind my tamed beings. Let's see how long it takes for me to cool off while beating you to death. I have ways of surviving that I forgot to prep last time, but I won't die again. Come get wrecked, scrubs. A single member of the guard advanced and the robed and masked man took a swing, his staff just barely touching the armor of the opposition. At the moment of impact, a broken bar, the attacking guard exploded into a fine red mist with less than a tap, his armor and clothes sent flying like they were launched by a bad physics engine along with his sword and shield. A broken bar. Both parties stared in disbelief, but the man in white and red robes broke free from his stunned state first. As he took one step forwards, and the guards took one backwards. The man took another, and the guards did the same. Beneath his mask, the man smiled as he realized that the guards were terrified of him. Well then, as the heroes of old once said, a broken bar, the man said as he dashed forwards, moving far faster than any normal man could, having finally decided that it was a good idea to make use of the physical abilities he possessed as an endgame and max-level player. Leroy Jenkins tilde. A little under half a day after what everyone in the camp was referring to as the incident, Nora and the rest of the Red Mountain forces were on their way to Paradiso City. Thankfully, all but one of the armies were but a day's march from the city, less than that if they didn't stop for breaks. As much as her commanders argued that the troops could withstand a long march with no breaks, but Nora knew better than to risk it. If the forces gathered were too tired to do anything upon arrival, that could end in a whole day utterly wasted with no real progress made towards a siege. Nora had heard stories from her parents, grandparents and Vaile himself about how entire armies were wiped in a single battle due to having endured a long march. She knew that said stories had very specific conditions involved in them, but she would rather her troops arrive at the end of the day and set up camp outside the walls of Paradiso City than to have her troops arrive during the midday sun and be too tired to even make cursory defenses. Such a hasty march would leave Red Mountain's military forces open to an attack, which while Paradiso City did not have the numbers needed to deal a decisive blow under normal conditions, Tired troops made for poor combatants while rested ones fighting on their home soil made for excellent ones. All in all, there were far too many risks and far too few rewards for such a move, and Nora wisely decided to reject any and all pleas to the contrary. A broken bar. The march was uneventful, aside from Nora repeatedly having to force her generals to stop speeding up the troops. She got it, though. She understood their reasoning. After all, it was pride and glory seeking, and a hint of one-upmanship. Whoever got to the city first would have bragging rights and all that, but Nora did not want to risk the whole operation because of pride and a short-sighted lust for glory. If anyone speeds up or doesn't stop for breaks at the appointed times, they are getting demoted on the spot. After yelling this through the enchanted earrings on everyone's heads, all involved in the advance got the message. It was hard to claim the glory of being the one to arrive first when you were not leading the troops anymore. After all, as soon as the Red Mountain bandits reached a point where they could see the thriving metropolis, however, their mood soured. The city was in a bad way, and there was evidence of a massive conflict having broken out. Signs seen from afar showed that the walls had been busted down from the inside and the gates that were visible had either been knocked down from within or without or were lying several meters away from where they were supposed to be. A Rian scout who happened to be more avian in appearance managed to get a bird's eye view and saw the city was shattered and broken. Something very powerful had rampaged through the buildings and plazas alike with equal levels of destructive wrath. The one thing that unsettled everyone who received the report was that whatever massive monster that did this seemed to be nowhere within the city. Nora cursed under her breath, as she wondered where Vaile had gotten to. She had tried to message him several times, but never managed to get a reply. Sure, Vaile wasn't wearing the earrings that everyone else was, but she had managed to give him an amulet that did the same thing and he had it on when he left earlier. Nora steeled herself and at the first light of dawn she marched into the broken city alone. If there was some kind of powerful creature in there, then as a servant of Vaile and descendant of civilized she had a much better chance than anyone else of reasoning with her broken bar whatever had caused this mess. A broken bar. The streets were littered with rubble and obvious signs that the denizens of this place put up a struggle, but to no avail. The scent of death filled this place and seemed to seep from under every shattered building and every pile of rubble. Nora saw a glimpse of movement from within a store that had its top half blown off and she drew her twin hand axes and cautiously advanced. A small breath, that of a child, was barely audible to anyone else, but to her it was crystal clear. She pulled off a door that had fallen into a corner and revealed two children. One of them was around 4 while the elder of them was around 10. They seemed to be related, but Nora couldn't be sure until they confirmed it. The elder of the two, who was a boy, brandished a small knife at Nora in both hands. He was very obviously unfamiliar with using a weapon, and so Nora didn't treat him as a threat. Stay away. You won't hurt my sister. Obviously terrified of the tall woman in armor and a cloak in front of him, the boy swung the small knife around for a bit before Nora grabbed his hands and took the knife from him. She tossed the knife far away without breaking eye contact. 2 things. 1. People shouldn't wield knives like that when trying to defend those they care for. 2. What has happened here to turn this city upside down? Deciding that she was too intimidating, Nora sat down and took a favorite childhood toy, a stuffed dragon, from her storage, handing it to the boy who looked at it cautiously before handing it to his younger sister. Nora then held up her hands after placing her hand axes on the ground. See, I'm not going to hurt you. So, can you tell me what happened? The boy looked her over and seemingly just realized who she was. Ah, you're that evil bandit lady everyone is so scared of. I won't let you. The boy tried to grab Nora's hand axes, but Nora just smiled as the boy nearly threw his back out trying in vain to even lift them a millimeter off the floor. The boy struggled for a while before Nora picked up both hand axes and twirled them effortlessly. Soul-bound items. No one can lift them aside from their owner. Useful as a paperweight and a doorstopper, among other things, she said with a smile. The boy was not amused but his sister was. Nora once again set her hand axes down on the ground and placed her hands on her lap. Yes, I am the tyrant of Red Mountain, But I am not evil. I am also not very scary unless I need to be or unless you are a wicked and evil person. I am a bandit for justice, after all. Are you a wicked and evil person? Nora asked, knowing full well the hypocrisy of running a massive continent-spanning criminal syndicate that dealt in more vices than could be counted on one's fingers and toes, and yet saying her organization was full of bandits for justice. The boy said softly. Is your sister an evil person? His sister shook her head as she played with the worn dragon plushie. Then I am not going to hurt you. Now, please tell me what monster destroyed everything so I can bring them to justice. What happened here? Why is everything destroyed? The boy sat down as Nora took a tray of cookies from her storage, still warm from the oven, as well as 3 cups and a jug of cold milk. Pouring milk into the cups, drinking some of it and eating a cookie to show they weren't poisoned, the 2 kids ate as the boy recounted the events that transpired not too long ago. As his story went on, Nora got the sinking feeling that the monster was someone she knew all too well. She listened to his story and, after it was done, she tossed him a bag of coins and walked towards the ruins of the castle. A fair bit before the Red Mountain forces found out about the state of Paradiso City, in fact it was a short while before the city was to be in ruins at all, Vaile had lost his temper. He had never had to experience the horrors of genocide or other such cruelty in his world, and only got a single glimpse of what average people are capable of when cruelty is mandatory. Wincher had killed that little girl right in front of him and fed her dead body to the mob. He always had a soft spot for children, and seeing the heads of dozens of children burning in a massive bonfire in a wide plaza had set him off. He had also, for quite a while, failed to recognize the vast level and stat difference between himself and most of the normal people of the world. He had caught a passing glance of that difference back when he was first attacked by the dwarf assassins, but he had been too caught up in his escape and never realized just how powerful a max-level player character from the endgame of FDMMORPG could be. Almost everyone in the world was so much weaker than him that, even though his build was not at all geared towards melee combat, he could reduce a man to a fine red mist in a single strike. Forget overkill, Vaile was breaking the laws of physics and sending everything he struck flying like it had been struck by a giant in that old, buggy game that had been that now defunct studio's second-to-last great game. A pity that its greed had destroyed all trust people had in it and then ended up filing for bankruptcy when its games fell flat. So now, what was Vaile doing now? He was wreaking house. That was what he was doing. He was demolishing city blocks with a few swings of his staff, erasing every single person, guards, mostly, but also the occasional suicidal maniac with a bit of martial training who thought of themselves as the next great hero of legend, who tried to stop him and generally rampaging uncontrollably. He was seeing red, and his rage only got worse with every few swings. The reason for that was simple. It was because every few swings opened up a way for him to see the results of the atrocities committed in Paradiso City. Every block he demolished revealed a basement filled with the desiccated corpses of non-humans, a scene of grisly torture or some other, even more unspeakable act of sadism and evil. Vaile was no snowflake, but he also was not a cold and callous individual. Like any sane man in this situation, the sheer barbarity, monstrosity and savagery on display forced his fight-or-flight response to activate, and oh boy did he choose to fight. A broken bar. Mulvin heard the thunderous roars of explosions from inside the castle. Hastening to the window, he looked out and saw utter destruction. The walls had been breached from within, but he and the other conspirators had not received word that Red Mountain was nearby, so he could not guess who or what could have begun such a devastating attack, and from within the walls no less. He watched as entire districts were sent flying into the air, reduced to rubble and wood splinters by something or someone. God of mankind, what is going on down there? One of the people in the court who was watching the carnage like him exclaimed in astonishment. I don't know. But whatever it is that is down there, we must prepare for the eventuality that it turns its attention towards us and the king. Mulvin and the others had to act soon, because this event certainly threw a spanner in the works. Worry not, Jaffa said loudly and with great vigor. Or rather, the puppet-eared corpse of Jaffa said it. All eyes turned to the Helican-possessed body. I will gather the wisest, most loyal and most powerful among you, to keep the king safe and secure from that which is outside. No threat from without shall harm a hair on his head, and these a broken bar. Whatever it is that is being so destructive will surely be forced to halt at the sight of their loyalty and duty. As Jaffa selected the 60 men, all members of the plot to assassinate the king of the Trelawney kingdom, Mulvin smirked and sighed. That demon really has a way with words. Every single line it has spoke out here has been 100% true, yet at the same time filled with just enough loopholes that it is also engaging in total deception. At the wisest, most loyal and the most powerful can refer to either those loyal to the king, or to the tyrant. No threat from without shall harm a hair on his head means that threats from within can and will do so instead, or threats from without. As for a halting at the sight of our loyalty and duty, a broken bar, does it know what is causing all of this? The conspirators escorted their target away from the main hall and into the throne room and sat the king upon his throne. All guards, Jaffa yelled, leave the throne room at once and prepare to intercept the being rampaging outside the castle. Sortie as soon as you can and slow it down, even if it costs you your lives. That being will not be able to spill a drop of His Majesty's living blood today if you leave the castle and fight it. The guards looked at each other, shrugged, and then left. They knew better than to try and disagree with the man who actually held all the power in the kingdom. Soon enough, the throne room was empty, save for the king, Jaffa, and the 60 conspirators. My king, please stand. Come down from your regal seat and join us as we discuss the future. The inbred and mentally handicapped mess of a king saw nothing wrong with this and got up and hobbled over to the 60 men and one marionette of a corpse. Seconds passed, then minutes, then half an hour. What were we gun tack boat? The king asked through his numerous deformities. Jaffa nodded to Mulvin, who approached the now surrounded king. We were going to talk about how the world will be a better place at the end of this conflict. Oh, Carl, why is that? Because, Mulvin said as he thrust a dagger into the king's body. A broken bar, it won't have you or your regime in it. Apparently, the deformities and genetic mutations caused by a dozen or so centuries of inbreeding rendered Zarek Naru Trelawney unable to feel pain, and so he did not notice that he had been stabbed. The conspirators moved in and each blade found its mark again and again. Finally, the genetic mess that was Zarek realized that he was being assassinated and tried to flail. Unfortunately, several stab wounds had severed some of his nerves, and the most recent stab to come was aimed at his spine. The last strike found purchase and the king of the Trelawney kingdom collapsed like a rag doll. Blood seeped out of every hole in his body, and the light started leaving his eyes. Then a broken bar. Jaffa collapsed and the Helican emerged. It reached down with one of its spidery hands and tore something ephemeral and shadowy from Zarek's dying body before stuffing it in its inhumanly wide mouth and vanishing from the material world. Did a broken bar, did it just eat his soul? One of the conspirators only managed to get that one question out before a massive tremor shook the castle. Whatever had demolished so much of the city had arrived and was dealing with the castle. Based on the sounds, it was close, very close. The door to the throne room blew to pieces and a very irate man in a white and red robe and a mask rushed in. The man stopped just short of the conspirators and, in that moment, they realized just who was behind all the devastation. Vaile, mighty broken bar. With those two words, they all dropped to their knees and worshipped the figure that stood before them. He was a carbon copy of the idols they had prayed to, albeit far more regal and more magnificent. A broken bar. What is going on? Did you seriously turn on your own king to save your skins? No, Lord. We wear the mark of Red Mountain. See? We are your faithful servants, O mighty Vaile. They all showed their signet rings, and Vaile sighed. Of course Savald would plant assassins so close to his foe, and of course they would see his rampage as the perfect moment to strike. Still, he had wanted to kill the king himself, but maybe that would have pushed him over the edge. During his rampage he had not intentionally harmed any civilians aside from those who turned their weapons on him, although the devastation he had wrought likely resulted in a large amount of collateral damage. Well, good job, I guess a broken bar. I kind of wanted to. Vaile immediately felt a chill run down his body. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end and he immediately teleported to the depths of the Kraskan forest. He vanished not a moment too soon, as almost immediately after he departed, Cho and the other members of the Five-Clawed Paw arrived in the throne room of the now headless Trelawney Kingdom. The conspirators were shocked at the appearance of Thesey broken bar things, but the Rattan ruling council were only interested in finding their precious prize. "Where is he?" Cho snarled. "We will die before we tell a monster like you where Almighty Vaile went. Even if we did know, there would be nothing you could do to force us to tell you." An emerald lightning bolt sent the human spinning through the air. He was alive, but definitely not having a good day. Squick put her arm in between Cho and the other conspirators, as if to protect them. "Squick, what is it?" "Why protect these man-things?" Cho asked her personal assassin. "They are wearing the same signet rings as the ones who aided us in dealing with the beard things." Looking at them, they sure enough were property of Red Mountain, and therefore under the protection of Savelt. Cho clicked her tongue and tried to trace Vaile's position, but, like when she found out he was here, the spell was only just barely able to determine where he was. Cho howled and opened another portal, this time to the Under Empire. "Are we just giving up?" Ripper almost screamed at Cho, furious that they would not be trying to chase Vaile down. "For now, yes. It would be foolish to try and find him in the Kraskan forest. The only way to find him would be to burn down the whole area, and that would end up killing him. He will be found, and he will be ours. He can't stay in the forever, after all." The 5 rat women went through the portal, and the conspirators breathed a sigh of relief. Their mission was done, and they didn't die. Now all they had to do was wait for Red Mountain to arrive and all would be well. Boy, would they have a story to tell the new tyrant. Following Nora's discovery that Vaile had gone on a rampage within the capital of the former Trelawney Kingdom, she made her way to the castle at the heart of the city, or rather, what was left of it. She did not expect to meet any survivors, even writing off the infiltrators as dead men. Imagine her surprise when she arrived and was greeted by all 60 men who were supposed to be the slayers of a mad king. The 60 men kneeled in supplication and Nora demanded to know what had happened. She had obtained a version of the prior events from the child back in the ruins of Paradiso City, but now she wanted the words of an adult, someone more willing to tell her a more grounded version of events. The descendants of the first infiltrators readily supplied her with their version of Vaile's divine wrath and spared no expense when regarding the 5 rat people and their pursuit of their god. The unexpected revelation that a demon, or rather, an infernal, had been behind the rising of the masses and the odd coincidences she and the others had experienced on the warpath made Nora wonder what kind of deals Savelt had made without telling anyone. Nora looked down from the hill that the ruined castle sat upon and towards the ruined city. Watching the Red Mountain forces enter the city in search of her, and to occupy the place, made her realize that she had been absent too long. She shook her head and walked down the road to meet up with the forces that had so brazenly defied her orders. She would give them a stern talking to, but not too stern. She did realize that, after seeing the state the city was in from the outside, they were likely very worried for her safety. She had been inside for a long time, relatively speaking, and had not communicated what she was doing inside to anyone. Yeah, going dark shortly after entering a ruined city was a big no-no, especially for a head of state and de facto head of the military. She would really like to discuss things with the 5-Clawed Paw too. They chased off Vaile, who was to be her husband, and since he wasn't back by now, he was obviously not going to come back unless he knew the coast was clear, which, since the Rattan ruling council had tracked him all the way here before, it wasn't. She was going to have to deal with everything by herself. Tearing down a nation is easy, but building a new one in its place is damn difficult. Or so Savelt had told her. She had a lot to do, and the other nations surrounding her new acquisition would be looking for any sign of weakness in order to take what they could from the still fresh corpse of the old Trelawney Kingdom. What a pain a broken bar. A broken bar. 8 years later, Nora sat in a throne fit for a king. She had long since given up on trying to re-establish the former Paradiso City as the capital of her nations. Instead, She and the entire seat of government was now located in the very mountain fortress that the former Continental Crime Syndicate called home. There were several reasons for the change. Number one among them being that there was no Vaile-damned way she would have her new government in a ruined city that was still in the midst of rebuilding. It would have been impossible to hold any kind of ceremony there, especially in that cramped and shattered husk of a castle. How old was that thing anyways? There was too much dust and too many evil acts had taken place there. So, instead, she was hosting the ceremony to crown herself the new queen of the Red Mountain Monarchic Republic. Yes, that is right, a republic with a monarch. She had seen full well what a pure and sacred bloodline could do, and decided that, although she was arguably the smartest and the most gifted person in the nation, she wanted to follow the plan laid out by Vaile. She and those that shared her lineage, or whatever lineage that eventually replaced it, would, for the most part, be figureheads. They would only be able to seize control in times of crisis, and those times would be decided upon by the will of the people. She was still a monarch, but now she would have the free time needed for her next big project. Or so she believed. For you see, despite inviting the other nations on the continent to witness her ascension and the dissolution of the Red Mountain Bandits as a criminal organization, no one showed up. Well, that isn't entirely true. People did show up, just not the people who she invited to come and witness this historic moment. She swept her gaze across the room quite slowly, taking in every face, and all lack thereof. She saw her own subjects sitting beside the forms of monsters and beasts. It seemed that Vaile had established ties to a great many of Vaile's tamed beings. She saw infernals begrudgingly sitting beside celestials, greenskins and the chimeric beastmen sizing each other up, the Rattan ruling council glaring daggers at the beastman and herself. There were others quite motley crew of bodies, all of them having had some connection to Vaile in the past. As the ceremony began, the voices aside from those engaging in Nora's crowning fell silent. Thankfully, the ceremony went off without a hitch, and soon after the reception was held. That too was bizarre. Each representative from the various signing members of that ancient treaty brought gifts, of which some brought alcohol. As Nora awoke the next day with a splitting headache, she realized that letting the booze be drunken there and then was definitely not the best idea she ever had. Still, she now had connections to every other major faction that followed Vaile, so what could possibly go wrong? 5 days later and the hangover had worn off. The guests still had not left, and neither had the reception ended. Nora talked it up with those who had served Vaile long before she had been born, and slowly made her way over to Cho and the other 4 Rattan rulers. As she approached, they glared at her and Nora almost expected them to either leave in a huff or try and fight her. They did neither of the two and instead decided to try and smooth things over, and thus the attempt at diplomacy began. Nora opened with a greeting, which the 5 Rattan women reciprocated. Nora then thanked them for showing up, despite her not being able to send them an invite, to which they replied that it was no big deal. Slowly, the conversation became more and more cordial and less gruff and curt. Nora then asked if they knew where Vaile was, to which they merely responded with a clicking of their tongues and an expression that was full of disappointment. They did not seem to know where he was either. The dialogue continued for some time before one of Nora's subordinates approached her and handed her a letter from another kingdom. Seeing the stamps of not just the kingdom that sent the letter but several others as well, Nora decided that she would read it then and there. As she read the letter, her grip on the parchment tightened and her anger became palpable to all around her, including the representatives. "What does it say?" Cho asked in a raspy voice. Nora took a breath to calm herself down and spoke in a voice that everyone could hear. "This is a demand from the other nations that I and my nation abandon our devotion towards Vaile or be faced with a holy war to force us to change our faith. If I and my nation don't convert to the common faith," it states, "they will bring the word of the true pantheon to my nation of heathens and infidels with fire and sword." Can you believe them? There was silence, then a single chuckle from somewhere in the reception hall started a chain reaction of sinister and ominous laughter from everyone. Nora nodded silently to the guests and they nodded in affirmation back. The other nations controlled by the races had already been badly hurt by the tamed beings in attendance, or at least their people, Now they thought they were strong enough together to take on Nora and the Red Mountain Monarchic Republic. Nora and the other people in the room let a sinister smile cross their faces. It was really too bad that the nations that sent this missive didn't know that the treaty still stood. The reception would have to be cut short, unfortunately, for there was a war to begin. Nora's nation was not alone. It was package deal. If you messed with one member of the treaty and the other members were allowed to help, you would be messing with all of them. A few days later, she found a letter on her desk. It was written in a style she had not seen in over 8 years, but knew straight away who had sent it, although the one who penned the letter is long dead by now. Cautiously, she opened it and read Savilt's final message to her. As she finished, a smile crossed her face and she muttered a bit under her breath. "You damn old man of mine. You were still pulling everyone's strings months after you died." Nora smiled and sat down at her desk and read over the last paragraph of the letter again. They read, "And so, if this letter finds you, my plans reached their fruition. We have retaken our rightful place and now the wheels of the war one have planned for have started turning. You learned everything I could have taught you, Nora. Now go and make your own way, for my last plan has reached its end. You are now the schemer, you are now the mastermind. Stack the deck, rig the jury, count the cards, and make your move when the time is right. I have faith that you will follow in my footsteps and even go beyond them. You will never know defeat, and the enemies of Red Mountain will fall. You'll go far, kid. Sincerely, Savilt." A broken bar. 8 years earlier, Vaile walked through the Kraskan forest, completely unfamiliar with the environment and basically just waiting for a beastman to find him. He had no hope of getting out of this place on his own, and now that he was here, he had to either refuse to uphold his word to the beastmen here or assist them in whatever objectives they wanted his help with. Vaile would never let it be known that he was not a man of his word. He said that the next time he came here would be the time he would help them, and he also said that after he was done helping Red Mountain he would come here, so he couldn't just leave. Even if he could, he couldn't find anything in this place and assumed he was wandering in circles. Vaile sat down and decided to take a nap in the shadows that the Kraskan forest was filled with. He would just close his eyes for a short while and then he would try a bit more to find someone, before he could drift off. However, a horrible stench hit his nose. "Smells like a broken bardo in heat bait." Vaile barely got those words out before he heard the sounds of grunting and howling from the other side of the tree he was resting against. This was followed by a wet slopping sound that intensified in speed until both sources of the noises howled at once and the smell of bestial love juices flooded the air. The heavy huffing kept the slopping sounds from picking up again, but only for a while. Soon after they started up again. Vaile stood up and yelled at the top of his lungs, "Damn it! Get a fucking room, you perverts!" This stopped the noises and the sounds of 2 creatures running off faded into the dense undergrowth. Vaile started walking again, hoping to get as far away from the stink as he could and hopefully keep himself from being a target of it.